Story 1. The Phantom Convoy on Highway 63. Marcus Delgado had been hauling freight through Alberta for 17 years, and Highway 63, the notorious highway of death, held no mysteries for him anymore. The 443-kilometer stretch connecting Fort McMurray to the rest of civilization had claimed dozens of lives over the decades, but Marcus knew every curve, every frost heave, and every treacherous patch of black ice. On February 14, 2019, during a routine run hauling drilling equipment north to the oil sands, he encountered something that would shatter his understanding of that familiar road. The digital clock on his Kenworth's dash read 2:47 a.m. when he departed from grassland, the night swallowing his truck in absolute darkness. Winter in northern Alberta meant 18 hours of night, and the thermometer outside registered -38°C. His CB radio crackled with occasional chatter from other drivers, their voices a comforting reminder that he wasn't completely alone out here. The heater blasted warm air, but it barely kept the creeping cold at bay. Marcus had loaded his thermos with strong black coffee and had his playlist of classic rock ready for the long haul ahead. The first hour passed uneventfully. Snowbanks towered on either side of the highway, walls of white that reflected his headlights back at him. The road stretched straight and empty the way it always did during these dead-of-night runs. He passed the turnoff to Janvier, then continued north, watching his GPS track his progress with its usual reliability. The green line on the screen showed him exactly where he was, exactly where he'd been, and exactly where he was going. At 3:52 a.m., Marcus noticed headlights in his side mirror. Another truck a good half-mile back, but closing the distance. He felt relieved. Company on these lonely roads always made the time pass faster. He grabbed his CB radio. "This is northbound Kenworth hauling drilling equipment, mile marker 287. Got a smoky bear behind me or just another night owl?" Static answered him. Then faintly a voice responded, but the words were distorted, stretched like a recording played at the wrong speed. Marcus adjusted the squelch, frowning. "Repeat that, driver. You're breaking up." The headlights behind him grew closer, and that's when Marcus noticed something odd. There wasn't just one truck anymore. His mirror showed 3 sets of headlights, spaced evenly apart, all maintaining the exact same distance from each other. He hadn't seen them approach. They'd simply appeared as if materializing from the darkness itself. "Well, hell," Marcus muttered. "Convoy season." Sometimes truckers would group up for safety on these remote stretches, especially in winter. But something felt wrong. The trucks behind him moved in perfect synchronization, their headlights never wavering, never adjusting for the subtle curves in the road. Marcus had been around convoys before. They never moved with such mechanical precision. He pressed the accelerator, increasing his speed from 90 to 100 kilometers per hour. The trucks behind him matched his speed exactly, maintaining their distance with unnatural accuracy. Marcus tried the CB again. "This is northbound Kenworth to the convoy behind me. You guys running some kind of automated system? Never seen trucks hold formation like that." This time, multiple voices answered simultaneously, all speaking the same words in perfect unison. "Maintain your speed. Maintain your course. Do not deviate." A chill ran down Marcus's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. The voices sounded human, but they spoke with identical inflection, identical timing, as if reading from the same script. He checked his side mirror again. 4 trucks now, then 5, then 6. They continued appearing, adding to the convoy that stretched behind him into the darkness, all maintaining that impossible, perfect spacing. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His GPS showed his position clearly, mile marker 291, exactly where he should be. But when he looked at the landscape outside, something seemed wrong. The snowbanks looked different, taller somehow, their surfaces too smooth as if they'd been sculpted rather than formed by natural wind and drift. The moonlight, which had been absent all night, suddenly cast strange shadows that moved against the direction of his truck. He tried to slow down, tapping his brakes gently. Immediately, his CB radio exploded with voices no longer in unison but overlapping, urgent, angry. Maintain your speed. Do not deviate. Maintain your speed. Do not deviate. The words repeated, building into a cacophony that made Marcus wince and reach to turn down the volume. But the volume knob wouldn't turn. His fingers moved it, but the sound didn't change. If anything, it grew louder. And now he could hear something beneath the voices, a sound like grinding metal, like the earth itself groaning under tremendous weight. The convoy behind him had swollen to at least 15 trucks now, maybe more. Marcus couldn't count them accurately because they'd started to blur together, their headlights merging into a solid wall of light that turned night into day. His mirrors showed nothing but that blazing whiteness, and he had to squint against its intensity. That's when Marcus noticed his fuel gauge. It read 3/4 full. He'd filled up completely in grassland less than an hour and a half ago, and his truck got good mileage. He should still be nearly full, but even as he watched, the needle dropped. 3/4, half-quarter, eighth. The low fuel warning light blazed red on his dashboard. No, Marcus whispered. No, no, no. He looked at his GPS. Mile marker 312. But that was impossible. He'd been at 291 just moments ago. He couldn't have covered 21 kilometers in less than a minute. The landscape outside had changed dramatically. The snowbanks were gone. Instead, his headlights illuminated a flat, featureless plain that stretched in all directions. No trees, no rocks, no road signs. Just an endless expanse of white. But the road itself remained, a perfect black ribbon cutting through the emptiness. Marcus tried to slow down again, and this time he didn't touch the brakes gently. He stomped on them. The truck lurched, the trailer fishtailing slightly on the icy surface. But his speedometer didn't change. Still 100 kilometers per hour, as if his foot wasn't even on the brake pedal. The CB radio voices had merged into a single sound now. No longer words, but a sustained tone that resonated through the cab, making the coffee in Marcus's thermos vibrate in sympathetic frequency. The sound seemed to come from inside his own skull, bypassing his ears entirely. His GPS showed mile marker 367, then 423, then 511. The numbers climbed impossibly fast, scrolling upward like a broken odometer. Marcus recognized what they meant. He was traveling north far beyond the end of Highway 63, beyond Fort McMurray, beyond the edge of mapped territory. The green line on his GPS screen extended past the end of the displayed map, pushing into blank space. The convoy behind him had become something else entirely. When Marcus forced himself to look in the side mirror, he no longer saw distinct trucks. Instead, he saw shapes that suggested trucks, ghostly outlines that flickered and phased like images on a failing television screen. And behind them, stretching back to the horizon, he saw more shapes. Thousands of them, maybe millions, an endless procession of phantom vehicles following some route that existed outside normal space. Marcus's chest tightened. His breathing came in short, rapid gasps. The temperature inside the cab had dropped despite the heater running full blast. He could see his breath misting in front of his face. Frost began forming on the inside of the windshield. Crystalline patterns that spread like living things, like fingers reaching toward him. He grabbed his cell phone, but the screen showed no signal. Not surprising this far north. Except the phone showed something else too. The date. February 14th, 2047, 28 years in the future. "This isn't real," Marcus said aloud, his voice sounding thin and weak against the overwhelming tone from the CB radio. "This is hypothermia. I've crashed. I'm freezing to death somewhere, and this is a hallucination." But everything felt real. The steering wheel under his hands, the vibration of the engine, the smell of diesel and old coffee. If this was a dream, it was more vivid than any waking moment he'd experienced. The GPS showed mile marker 1047, then 3692. Then the numbers stopped meaning anything, replacing themselves with strings of symbols Marcus didn't recognize. The landscape outside remained that same featureless white, plain. But now he could see structures in the distance, vast geometric shapes that hurt to look at, angles that didn't quite connect the way they should, surfaces that reflected light in impossible directions. Marcus's fuel gauge read empty, but the truck kept moving. The engine sound had changed, deepening to a bass rumble that he felt more than heard, syncing with the tone from the CB radio. The two sounds merged, creating a rhythm that seemed to echo the beating of his own heart. And then, without warning, it all stopped. The convoy vanished, the tone cut off. The GPS screen went black, then rebooted, showing his position as mile marker 298, Highway 63. His fuel gauge read 3/4 full. The landscape outside showed normal snowbanks, normal trees, normal moonlight. Marcus's truck rolled to a stop on the shoulder. He sat there, engine idling, hands trembling on the wheel. His CB radio crackled with normal chatter. A driver asking about road conditions ahead, another complaining about the cold. The clock on his dash read 4:03 a.m. 16 minutes had passed since he'd first noticed the headlights behind him. He picked up the CB with a shaking hand. "This is northbound Kenworth, mile marker 298. Anyone else see that convoy? The lights?" A voice answered immediately, familiar, human, concerned. "Negative, Kenworth. Haven't seen another truck for the past hour. You doing okay?" "You sound rattled." Marcus opened his mouth to explain, then closed it. What could he say? That he'd traveled thousands of kilometers in 16 minutes? That he'd seen the date change by 28 years? That he'd followed a phantom convoy into some impossible space beyond the edge of the world? "Yeah," he finally said. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired. Think I need to pull over and rest." He did pull over at the next truck stop in Janvier. He parked his rig, climbed down from the cab, and walked around his truck on legs that didn't feel entirely stable. Everything looked normal. The drilling equipment in his trailer hadn't shifted. His tires showed normal wear. The truck had no damage. But when Marcus checked his GPS history, he found something that made his blood run cold. The device had recorded his journey, and the track showed exactly what he'd experienced. A green line extending far beyond the end of Highway 63, pushing north into unmapped territory, looping through space that shouldn't exist before snapping back to his current location like a rubber band released. Marcus completed his delivery to Fort McMurray, turned around and drove back south. He never spoke about that night to anyone, afraid they'd think him crazy or exhausted or both. But he changed his routes after that, avoiding Highway 63 during the dead hours between midnight and dawn. 5 years later, Marcus retired from trucking entirely. He never told his wife or his children the real reason why. But sometimes, late at night, he would wake from dreams of endless white plains and geometric shapes that hurt to remember. In those dreams, he could still hear the CB radio voices, all speaking in perfect unison, repeating those words over and over. "Maintain your speed. Maintain your course. Do not deviate." And in his darkest moments, Marcus wondered if he'd really escaped at all, or if he was still out there on that impossible road, following the phantom convoy into territories that existed beyond the boundaries of the world he knew. The thought that his current life might be the hallucination and that white plain the reality was something he tried not to consider too deeply. But the possibility haunted him until his dying day. Story 2. The Vanishing Town of Meridian. Victoria Chen specialized in emergency freight, the loads that absolutely had to arrive on time no matter what. After 12 years hauling for Express Northern Logistics, she'd built a reputation for reliability that kept her constantly busy. On October 3, 2021, she accepted what seemed like a straightforward job: deliver medical supplies from Edmonton to a small research facility near Cold Lake, a route she'd driven dozens of times. The delivery paperwork listed the destination as Meridian Medical Research Center, Highway 28, kilometer 178. Victoria didn't recognize the name, but rural Alberta was dotted with facilities she'd never heard of. She loaded her freightliner, checked her GPS coordinates, and headed east into the gathering dusk. The October evening brought that particular quality of light unique to autumn in Alberta, golden and melancholic, turning the endless fields into a patchwork of amber and shadow. Victoria had always loved this route. Highway 28 wound through rolling farmland, past weathered grain elevators and clusters of farmhouses with lights beginning to glow in their windows. She had her satellite radio tuned to a news station, half listening to stories about supply chain disruptions and pandemic recovery, while watching the kilometer markers tick past. The sun had fully set by the time she reached kilometer 150. True darkness settled over the landscape, the kind of complete blackness that only exists far from major cities. Victoria's headlights carved tunnels through the night, illuminating strips of asphalt bordered by fields that stretched away into infinite darkness. Her GPS showed the route clearly. Continue on Highway 28 for another 28 kilometers, then look for the turnoff to the research facility. At kilometer 165, Victoria noticed the fog. It rolled in from the north, a thick gray wall that swallowed the landscape. Within moments, visibility dropped to barely 30 meters. Victoria slowed to 60 kilometers per hour, leaning forward in her seat, eyes straining to catch the white lines marking the road's edge. The fog seemed to have texture, swirling in her headlights like something alive, like something that moved with purpose rather than random air currents. Her GPS chimed, announcing destination ahead 1 kilometer. Victoria checked her mirrors, habit even though she hadn't seen another vehicle for the past 20 minutes, and watched for the turnoff. The fog pressed against her windshield like a living thing, and for a moment, she considered pulling over to wait it out. But the medical supplies in her trailer were time-sensitive. The paperwork had emphasized that urgent delivery required, no delays. The turnoff appeared suddenly, a narrow paved road branching south from Highway 28. No sign marked it, which struck Victoria as odd. Research facilities usually had clear signage, but her GPS confirmed this was the correct turn. She downshifted, guided her truck onto the smaller road, and immediately felt the surface change beneath her tires. The pavement here felt different, smoother, newer, as if it had been recently laid. The fog thinned as she progressed down the road, and Victoria could make out shapes on either side. Buildings, she realized. A town. The GPS hadn't indicated any town between the highway and her destination, but there it was. Streetlights glowing with that distinctive orange sodium vapor light. Structures lined up along what appeared to be a main street, even sidewalks and crosswalks visible in the diffused illumination. Meridian, Victoria read on a sign at what appeared to be the town's entrance. Population 10847, founded 1923. She drove slowly down the main street looking for the research facility. The town seemed well-maintained but oddly empty. Every building had lights on, shops, restaurants, what looked like a small hotel, a gas station. But Victoria couldn't see a single person, no cars parked at the curbs, no movement in any of the windows. The businesses all appeared open, their open signs lit and visible but completely abandoned. Victoria's unease grew with each passing block. She'd driven through small Alberta towns at night before, and yes, they could be quiet, but never like this. There was always something, a dog, a car, a person walking home from somewhere. This town had nothing. It felt like a movie set, a facade with nothing behind it. Her GPS insisted she was at her destination. "You have arrived at Meridian Medical Research Center," the electronic voice announced. But Victoria saw no research facility, just this strange, empty town. She pulled her truck to a stop in the middle of the main street, no traffic to block, and sat there, engine idling, trying to make sense of the situation. That's when she noticed the details that made her skin crawl. The businesses were all open, lights on, but the goods inside them were wrong. She could see into the grocery store across the street, and the products on the shelves looked normal at first glance. Cereal boxes, canned goods, produce displays. But when she focused on them, something felt off. The brand names were almost right, but not quite. Kellogg's instead of Kellogg's, Campbell instead of Campbell's. And the colors seemed slightly wrong, as if someone had tried to recreate familiar products from memory rather than copying them exactly. The gas station's price sign showed fuel at 0.47 per liter. Victoria knew current gas prices. She tracked them religiously for her expense reports. Gas hadn't been that cheap in decades. She looked at the cars parked at the gas station's pump islands. They appeared to be modern vehicles, but again the details were wrong. The makes and models didn't quite match anything she recognized. They were almost Ford, almost Toyota, almost Chevrolet, but like looking at something through slightly distorted glass. Victoria grabbed her cell phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual in rural Alberta, but her phone showed something else disturbing. No network name at all. Not even no service or SOS only. Just blank space where the carrier information should be. And her clock had stopped. It showed 8:47 p.m., the exact time she'd turned off Highway 28. But the seconds weren't advancing. She tried her CB radio. Static. Not the usual white noise static, but something more complex. Patterns in the noise, almost like words, but distorted beyond recognition. Victoria turned the radio off quickly. The sound had made her head ache. The paperwork for the delivery sat on her passenger seat. Victoria picked it up, reading it more carefully this time. The address listed was Meridian Medical Research Center, Main Street, Meridian AB. But there was no street number, no unit number, no building name, just Main Street. Victoria looked out her windshield at the empty town. Which building was she supposed to deliver to? She couldn't exactly call the facility. Her phone had no signal, and she hadn't seen a single payphone in this bizarre ghost town. She made a decision. She'd get out, check a few buildings, see if any of them had signage indicating a medical research facility. If she couldn't find it in 15 minutes, she'd backtrack to Highway 28 and call her dispatcher from somewhere with cell service. This whole situation felt wrong, and Victoria had learned to trust her instincts over 12 years of driving through remote areas. She shut off her engine, grabbed a flashlight from her door pocket, and climbed down from the cab. The moment her boots hit the pavement, she realized how silent everything was. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant traffic sounds, nothing. The silence had weight pressing against her eardrums like she was deep underwater. The air smelled wrong too. Clean, almost antiseptic, without the usual sense of a town. No vehicle exhaust, no cooking food, no garbage, no earth smell from surrounding fields. It reminded Victoria of hospitals, that particular chemical cleanliness that suggested something had been scrubbed away. She walked toward the nearest building, the grocery store. Through the plate glass window, she could see the interior clearly. The lights hummed softly, fluorescent tubes casting their cold illumination over neat rows of shelves. The products sat in perfect arrangements, not a single item out of place. No dust, no wear. Everything looked brand new, as if the store had been stocked yesterday. Victoria tried the door. It opened easily, a small bell chiming as she entered. The sound echoed in the empty store, the bell ringing longer than it should, the note hanging in the air for several seconds after the door closed behind her. "Hello?" Victoria called. Her voice sounded flat, dead, swallowed by the space around her. "Is anyone here?" She walked down the nearest aisle, examining the products more closely. Up close, the wrongness became more apparent. A cereal box labeled Honey Nut Cheerio showed a mascot that was almost but not quite the familiar bee. A soup can advertised Campbell Chicken Noodle Soup with logo colors that were subtly off, the red too orange, the white too gray. Every product was like this, a slightly distorted version of something familiar. Victoria reached out to pick up a can, and her hand passed through it. Not like it was immaterial, she felt resistance like pushing through thick gelatin, but the can didn't move. Her fingers penetrated its surface, sinking into it as if it were made of slightly hardened jello. She yanked her hand back, heart pounding. She turned and ran for the door, no longer caring about maintaining composure. The bell chimed again as she burst back onto the sidewalk, its note still wrong, still ringing too long. Victoria ran back to her truck, fumbled with the door handle, climbed into the cab, and hit the ignition. The engine started immediately, and Victoria had never been more grateful for the familiar diesel rumble. She threw the transmission into gear and accelerated down the main street, desperate to get back to Highway 28, back to normal reality. But the street didn't end. She drove past block after block, and the town kept going. The same types of buildings repeated, another gas station, another grocery store, another hotel. All lit, all empty, all subtly wrong. Victoria's GPS still showed her at her destination, the screen refusing to update as she drove. She checked her odometer. She'd driven 3 kilometers down the main street, but the town showed no sign of ending. That was impossible. The sign at the entrance had shown a population of 1,147. A town that size shouldn't be more than a few blocks long. Victoria's breath came in short gasps. Panic clawed at her chest. She pressed harder on the accelerator, watching her speedometer climb 60, 70, 80 kilometers per hour down this empty main street. The buildings blurred past her windows, but they never changed, never showed variation. Just the same structures repeating endlessly. Then she saw the fog again. It materialized ahead of her, the same thick gray wall she'd driven through to enter this nightmare place. Victoria aimed her truck straight for it, praying it marked the exit, the boundary between this wrong place and the real world. The truck hit the fog bank, and for a moment Victoria couldn't see anything. Gray filled her vision completely. The sensation of movement stopped, though she could still feel the engine vibrating, still see her speedometer showing 80 kilometers per hour. Time seemed to freeze. Then she was through, bursting out onto Highway 28 like breaching the surface of deep water. Victoria gasped, her lungs filling with air that suddenly felt real in a way that the town's air hadn't. She slammed on her brakes, bringing the truck to a shuddering stop on the shoulder. Her GPS had reset. It showed her location as kilometer 166 on Highway 28. Her phone clock was running again, 8:53 p.m. Only 6 minutes had passed since she'd turned onto that side road, though it had felt like at least 30. Victoria sat there for a long time, hands shaking on the wheel, trying to process what she'd experienced. Finally, she picked up her cell phone. Full signal, 5 bars. She called her dispatcher. "Victoria, where are you? The facility's been trying to reach you." "What facility?" Victoria asked, her voice hoarse. "The Cold Lake Research Center, your delivery destination. They're at kilometer 189, not 178. There was a typo on the paperwork. They've been waiting for you for the past hour." Victoria looked at the delivery papers again. The address now read, kilometer 189. She was certain it had said 178 before, but the paper showed 189, printed clearly, no sign of correction or alteration. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, Victoria said, and ended the call. She delivered the medical supplies without incident. The Cold Lake Research Center was a normal facility staffed by normal people in a normal location. They thanked her for the delivery, signed the paperwork, and sent her on her way. Victoria drove back to Edmonton that night, passing kilometer 178 on Highway 28 just after midnight. She slowed, looking for the turnoff, the narrow paved road that had led to the town called Meridian. There was nothing there. Just empty fields stretching away into darkness, no road, no town, no sign that anything had ever existed in that location. She filed her delivery report and said nothing about the detour. What could she say? That she'd spent 6 minutes in a town that didn't exist? That she'd seen buildings full of products that were almost but not quite real? That she'd driven through 3 kilometers of Main Street that couldn't possibly exist? Victoria kept driving for Express Northern Logistics, but she never accepted another delivery that had any ambiguity in its address. She always verified exact coordinates, exact building names, exact contact information. And she never ever turned off Highway 28 at kilometer 178, even though every time she passed it she could swear she saw something in the fields there. Lights in the distance, structures that flickered at the edge of perception like something trying to become real but not quite succeeding. The medical supplies she'd delivered that night were later checked by the facility. They'd been contaminated somehow, every single package showing signs of exposure to something the lab couldn't identify. The supplies had to be destroyed. The facility filed an insurance claim, but they never blamed Victoria. How could they? The contamination happened before she'd even picked up the load, at least according to the chemical analysis. But Victoria knew better. She knew that for 6 minutes those supplies had existed in a place that wasn't quite real, surrounded by products and buildings and an entire town that couldn't exist in normal space. Whatever that place was, it had left its mark on everything she'd carried through it. She retired from trucking 3 years later, taking a dispatcher job where she worked from home, coordinating routes for other drivers. But sometimes, late at night when processing delivery requests, she'd see an address that made her pause. Meridian Medical Research Center, Main Street, Meridian AB. The address would appear on her screen for just a moment, then flicker and change to something else, something real, and Victoria would quickly reassign that delivery to a different route, a different driver, making sure no one else would have to turn off Highway 28 at kilometer 178 and discover what waited there in the fog. Story 3. The Breathing Cargo. Daniel Kowalski hauled refrigerated freight, mostly food products from processing plants to distribution centers across Western Canada. After 9 years behind the wheel of his International with its 48-foot reefer trailer, he thought he'd transported every possible kind of cargo. On November 18, 2020, a rush job came through his dispatcher at 3 in the morning. Pick up a load from an agricultural research facility near Olds, Alberta, and deliver it to a processing plant outside Red Deer. A simple 90-kilometer run. The paperwork described the cargo as organic research specimens requiring temperature control at exactly 2 degrees Celsius. The facility promised a $2,000 bonus for immediate pickup and delivery within 4 hours. Daniel, who had been planning to take a few days off for his daughter's birthday, decided one more quick run wouldn't hurt. He'd regret that decision for the rest of his life. He arrived at the research facility at 4:15 a.m., the building a squat concrete structure surrounded by empty fields that stretched away into pre-dawn darkness. A single overhead light illuminated the loading dock, where 3 workers in white lab coats waited with a forklift and 24 sealed containers. The containers were unusual. Reinforced plastic boxes, each about 3 feet on a side, with heavy-duty latches and what looked like air holes drilled into the sides. Temperatures critical, one of the workers told Daniel as they loaded the containers into his trailer. Keep it at exactly 2 degrees. If it drops below 0 or rises above 5, call us immediately. He handed Daniel a phone number written on a slip of paper. And don't open the containers. The specimens are fragile and light-sensitive. Daniel had hauled plenty of biological cargo before. Beef, chicken, seafood, even laboratory animals. He wasn't squeamish, but something about these containers made him uneasy. Maybe it was the excessive number of latches, 8 per container when 2 would have been adequate. Or maybe it was the way the workers handled them, wearing thick gloves despite the mild indoor temperature, moving carefully as if the containers held something dangerous. He secured the load, checked his reefer unit, temperature holding steady at 2 degrees, and pulled out of the facility just before 5 a.m. The drive to Red Deer would take about 90 minutes on Highway 2, a straight shot north through some of the most boring landscape in Alberta. Daniel had his coffee, his audiobook, and clear roads. Easy money. The sun wouldn't rise for another 2 hours. Daniel's headlights cut through the darkness as he merged onto Highway 2, the reefer unit humming behind him, maintaining its cold chain. He settled into his seat, listening to a thriller novel about a detective hunting a serial killer, the narrator's voice providing companionship in the empty hours before dawn. 30 minutes into the drive, Daniel heard the first sound. It came from the trailer, a soft thump like something shifting inside one of the containers. He turned down the audiobook, listening. Another thump, then silence. Cargo shifted sometimes, especially if it wasn't secured perfectly. Daniel wasn't worried. The containers had been strapped down properly. But then he heard something else, a sound that made his hands tighten on the steering wheel. It was faint, barely audible over the road noise and the reefer unit's hum, but unmistakable. Breathing. Deep, slow, rhythmic breathing, like a large animal sleeping. Daniel turned off the audiobook completely. He listened carefully, trying to convince himself he'd imagined it. The reefer unit's compressor cycled on and off. His tires hummed against the pavement. The wind pushed against the truck's side, creating subtle whistles around the mirrors. And beneath it all, that breathing sound. In and out, in and out. Not from one location, but from multiple points in the trailer, as if several large things were breathing in synchronized rhythm. Specimens, Daniel said aloud, trying to rationalize what he was hearing. They said specimens, probably animals, probably sedated. But what kind of animals required temperature control at exactly 2 degrees? And why the excessive security on the containers? And why would a rush job pay $2,000 for a 90-kilometer drive? Daniel checked his temperature gauge. Still 2 degrees. Everything normal. He was imagining things. Had to be. 9 years of night driving had made him jumpy, that's all. The mind played tricks in the dark, especially when you were tired and running on coffee instead of sleep. The breathing continued. Daniel tried to ignore it, focusing on the road ahead. Highway 2 stretched straight and empty, the white line marking the shoulder the only feature in an endless expanse of darkness. Occasionally, another vehicle passed in the opposite direction, their headlights briefly illuminating the interior of his cab before fading back into night. At 6 a.m., the breathing changed. It became faster, shallower, like something waking up. The thumping sounds increased, not violent but persistent. Movement inside the containers, definitely movement. Daniel could feel it transmitted through the truck's frame, subtle vibrations that traveled from the trailer to the cab. He picked up his phone to call the number the facility worker had given him. No signal. That was strange. Highway 2 had good coverage. Daniel's phone showed full bars, but when he tried to dial, nothing happened. The call wouldn't connect. The breathing grew louder. Now it sounded less like sleeping animals and more like something else. something that breathed with purpose, with awareness. Daniel could hear variations in the rhythm, as if whatever was in those containers was adjusting to something, responding to something. Then the smell started. At first, Daniel thought something was wrong with his reefer unit, a refrigerant leak maybe, or a problem with the insulation. But this smell didn't match any mechanical failure he'd experienced before. It was organic, deeply unpleasant, like meat that had started to spoil but hadn't quite gone completely bad yet. The smell of something living but not quite alive in the normal sense. Daniel's stomach churned. The smell intensified, seeping into the cab despite the closed pass-through between the tractor and trailer. He cracked his window, desperate for fresh air, but the smell followed him, pervasive and inescapable. The thumping inside the trailer became rhythmic now, coordinated. Thump, thump, thump. Like whatever was in those containers was hitting the sides in unison. 24 containers, 24 sources of that deliberate, measured sound. Daniel's breathing quickened. His heart hammered against his ribs. He checked his GPS. Still 45 kilometers from Red Deer. 45 kilometers of listening to whatever was happening in his trailer. 45 kilometers of that smell, 45 kilometers of wondering what the hell he was transporting. He tried his phone again. Still no signal, still couldn't connect. The radio produced only static. His CB radio, which should have picked up chatter from other truckers on this busy highway, gave him nothing but dead air. At 6:23 a.m., the containers started making a new sound, scratching. Not like claws on metal, but something more disturbing, like fingernails on wood, but multiplied by dozens of sources, creating a symphony of scratching that rose and fell in waves. Daniel could visualize it without wanting to. Whatever was inside those containers was awake now, fully awake, and trying to get out. The temperature gauge still read 2 degrees, but Daniel could feel cold radiating from the trailer, a bone-deep chill that shouldn't have penetrated the insulated walls of his cab. His breath misted in front of his face. The windshield started to fog despite the heater running full blast. He pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing his speed up to 130 kilometers per hour. The speed limit was 110, but Daniel didn't care. He wanted this cargo out of his truck, wanted to be done with this run, wanted to never think about this night again. The scratching intensified. Now Daniel could hear individual sounds within the mass of noise. Scraping, dragging. Something wet sliding against plastic. The breathing had changed again, becoming ragged and excited, like whatever was in those containers sensed their approach to the destination. Or sensed something else. Daniel's headlights illuminated a sign. Red Deer, 25 kilometer. Almost there. He just had to make it 25 more kilometers. That's when he felt the truck lurch. Not from wind or road conditions, but from weight shifting in the trailer. The containers were moving. Not just their contents, but the containers themselves, sliding around despite being strapped down. Daniel felt the trailer sway, fishtailing slightly before he corrected with the steering wheel. No, 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 Daniel muttered. If the cargo shifted badly enough, he could jackknife. At this speed, on this empty highway, he could lose control completely. Another lurch. The trailer swayed harder this time. Daniel could hear straps breaking, that distinctive snap of industrial-strength restraints failing. The containers were sliding around back there, slamming into the trailer's walls. But that was impossible. Daniel had seen those containers loaded. Each one weighed maybe 100 pounds. They shouldn't have enough mass to break straps or shift violently, unless something inside them was moving with enough force to overcome the straps. Unless whatever he was hauling was strong enough to move the containers from the inside. The temperature gauge dropped. 2 degrees, 1 degree, 0 degrees, -1, -2. The reefer unit's compressor screamed, trying to raise the temperature back to the set point, but it kept dropping. -5 degrees, -8 degrees. The smell became worse. Now it wasn't just spoiled meat, it was something chemical, something alien, something that made Daniel's eyes water and his throat close up. He coughed, gagging, trying to breathe through his mouth to avoid the worst of it. Red Deer's lights appeared on the horizon. Daniel could see the glow of the city, his destination somewhere in that cluster of civilization. 10 kilometers, just 10 more kilometers. The scratching stopped. The breathing stopped. For a moment, the trailer fell completely silent except for the reefer unit's struggling compressor. Daniel dared to hope that whatever was happening had ended, that he'd imagined the worst of it, that he'd make the delivery and discover these were just some kind of biological samples that had thawed and shifted around. Then the screaming started. It came from inside the containers, high-pitched, sustained, the sound of something in terrible pain or terrible rage. Not animal sounds. These screams had structure, almost like words, like language, but stretched and distorted beyond recognition. 24 sources of screaming, each slightly different in pitch, creating harmonics that made Daniel's vision blur and his inner ears ache. He slammed on the brakes. The truck's air brakes engaged with a hiss, bringing the rig to a shuddering stop on the shoulder of Highway 2. Daniel threw open his door and jumped down, stumbling away from the truck, hands pressed over his ears to block out the screaming that seemed to vibrate through his entire body. The trailer was moving, not rocking from shifted cargo, actively moving, bulging outward as if something inside was pushing against the walls. Daniel watched in horror as the metal sides distorted, shapes pressing against the interior surface, shapes that looked almost like hands, almost like faces, almost like things trying to force their way through solid steel. Then as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The screaming cut off mid-note. The trailer stopped moving. The temperature gauge, visible through his open cab door, showed 2 degrees again. The reefer unit's compressor cycled to its normal rhythm. Silence, complete silence, not even wind, not even distant traffic. Just absolute crushing silence that pressed against Daniel's eardrums. He stood there on the shoulder, 20 meters from his truck, breathing hard, wondering if he'd lost his mind. Maybe this was a breakdown. Maybe he'd been driving too many hours, ignoring fatigue, and his brain had just given up on processing reality correctly. His phone rang. The sound made Daniel jump. He fumbled it out of his pocket. Unknown number. Hello? His voice came out hoarse. Mr. Kowalski. The voice was calm, professional, feminine. This is Dr. Sarah Chen from the Olds Agricultural Research Facility. We see you've stopped. Is everything all right with the cargo? Daniel's mouth opened and closed. How did they know he'd stopped? Was there GPS tracking on the containers? The cargo, there's something wrong with it. It's moving, it's making sounds, Mr. Kowalski, Dr. Chen interrupted, her voice still calm but with an edge now. Listen carefully. The specimens are fine. What you're experiencing is a harmless biological response to temperature fluctuations. The cargo is completely safe. I need you to get back in your truck and complete the delivery. Can you do that? What am I carrying? Daniel demanded. What the hell are those things? A pause. Then, that information is classified. What I can tell you is that the specimens pose no danger if the containers remain sealed and temperature controlled. You signed a non-disclosure agreement when you accepted this job. I'm reminding you of your legal obligations. Daniel didn't remember signing anything beyond the standard delivery paperwork, but his mind wasn't processing clearly right now. I want this cargo out of my truck. You'll be at the delivery location in 8 minutes if you continue now, Dr. Chen said. 8 minutes, Mr. Kowalski. Then this is over. If you abandon the cargo, you'll forfeit the payment and face legal consequences for breach of contract. 8 minutes. The line went dead. Daniel stood there, phone in his hand, looking at his truck. The trailer appeared normal now. No bulging walls, no sounds. Just a standard reefer trailer sitting on the shoulder of Highway 2 with its lights on and its engine idling. 8 minutes. He could do 8 minutes. He needed the money. His daughter's birthday, Christmas coming up, the mortgage payment due. 8 minutes and this nightmare would be over. He walked back to his truck on legs that trembled. He climbed into the cab. He put the transmission in gear and pulled back onto the highway. And for the next 8 minutes he drove in complete silence, not daring to turn on the radio, not daring to make a sound. Just listening to his own heartbeat and the rumble of the engine. The delivery location was a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of Red Deer. A loading dock, several workers in hazmat suits, powerful lights illuminating the area. They unloaded the containers quickly and efficiently, never opening them, just transferring them into the building. The whole process took less than 10 minutes. Daniel got his payment, direct deposit, confirmed on his phone before he left the property. $2,000. He drove back to his home terminal, parked his truck, and went home without filing a post-trip report. He took a week off. When he returned to work, he told his dispatcher he didn't want any more research facility cargo, any more rush jobs, any more mystery loads. Just standard freight, nothing unusual. His dispatcher agreed without argument, which Daniel found strange. Usually they pushed back when drivers got picky about loads. But this time, there were no questions, no pressure to explain. Just an immediate accommodation. Daniel never learned what he'd transported that night. He searched online for the Olds, agricultural research facility, and found nothing. No website, no news stories, no public records. The phone number he'd been given had been disconnected. The building where he'd picked up the cargo showed up on satellite maps as an empty field. But sometimes, in the dead of night when he was trying to sleep, Daniel would hear it again. That breathing, deep and rhythmic and wrong. And he would lie awake wondering what those 24 containers had held, what those things were that had screamed in sounds almost like words. He wondered what would have happened if the containers had opened, if those latches had failed, if those things had gotten free. The thought that somewhere in Canada those specimens still existed, maybe in a laboratory, maybe in some storage facility, maybe somewhere worse, kept Daniel awake more nights than he cared to count. And he never ever accepted another cargo that was described as specimens again, no matter how much money they offered. The breathing had been real. The movement had been real. And whatever he'd carried in his trailer that night, it had been alive in a way that made Daniel's understanding of alive seem inadequate and naive. Story 4. The Loop on Highway 16. Thomas Brennan had driven the Yellowhead Highway, Highway 16, more times than he could count in his 15-year career hauling lumber from sawmills in British Columbia to distribution centers in Edmonton. The route was straightforward, head east through Jasper, past Hinton, through Edson, and into the city. On March 9, 2018, Thomas started what should have been his standard overnight run, leaving a mill near Valmount, BC at 11 p.m. with a load of processed timber destined for an Edmonton lumberyard. The weather forecast predicted clear conditions, the truck was in perfect mechanical order, and Thomas had made this exact trip so many times he could practically drive it in his sleep. But somewhere between Hinton and Edson on a stretch of highway he knew intimately, Thomas entered a nightmare that challenged his understanding of reality itself. The first 2 hours of the drive passed normally. Thomas crossed from British Columbia into Alberta just after 1 a.m., the familiar "Welcome to Wild Rose Country" sign passing in his headlights. The March night was cold but clear, stars brilliant against the black sky. His CB radio crackled with occasional chatter from other truckers, but this time of night, traffic was sparse. Thomas had his thermos of coffee, his playlist of classic country music, and the comfortable rhythm of a route he'd driven hundreds of times. At 1:47 a.m., Thomas passed through Hinton. The town's lights were a welcome interruption in the endless darkness, gas stations and fast food restaurants glowing like beacons. He considered stopping for a break but decided against it. He'd grab coffee in Edson about an hour ahead. He checked his fuel gauge, 3/4 full. Plenty to make it to Edson with reserve to spare. Highway 16 east of Hinton ran through dense boreal forest, the trees pressing close to the road's edge, their branches forming a canopy that blocked even the starlight. Thomas's headlights carved tunnels through the darkness, illuminating the white line marking the road's edge and the reflective markers that guided the way. A sign announced, Edson 72 kilometer. Thomas settled back in his seat, letting his mind drift into that semi-automatic state experienced drivers reached on familiar routes, conscious enough to react to any changes, relaxed enough to let the miles pass without stress. The trees flowed past his windows in an endless parade of shadows. The highway stretched straight and empty ahead. At 2:15 a.m., Thomas noticed the sign, Edson 68 kilometer. He frowned. He'd been driving for nearly 30 minutes since the last Edson sign, maintaining a steady speed of 100 kilometers per hour. He should have covered at least 50 kilometers, but according to this sign, he'd only traveled 4 kilometers. Thomas checked his odometer. It showed he'd driven 51.3 kilometers since passing through Hinton. The numbers didn't match. Either the signs were wrong or something strange was happening with the distances. He shook his head, assuming the sign was incorrect or that he'd misread the first one. Alberta transportation sometimes made mistakes with highway markers. He continued driving, watching his odometer click upward. 52 kilometers, 53, 54. At 2:31 a.m., another sign appeared. Edson, 68 kilometer. Thomas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That was the exact same distance as 16 minutes ago. But his odometer showed he'd driven another 16 kilometers. The numbers didn't make sense. He tried his cell phone. No signal, not unusual in this remote stretch. His GPS showed his position on Highway 16, the green line tracking his progress eastward, the map indicating he was approximately 40 kilometers west of Edson. The GPS agreed with his odometer, not with the signs. Thomas grabbed his CB radio. This is westbound hauler passing mile marker. He paused, looking at the marker he'd just passed. Marker 2 on 47. Anyone else on 16 noticing something weird with the distance signs? Static answered him. No voices, no responses. The CB had been carrying conversation earlier, but now it was silent except for the white noise hiss. CB check, Thomas tried again. This is westbound hauler on 16. Anyone copy? Nothing. The radio was functioning. The static proved that, but no one was responding. On a major highway like the Yellowhead, even at 2:30 a.m., there should be at least a few trucks within CB range. Thomas drove for another 20 minutes, watching his odometer increment. When the next sign appeared, his stomach clenched with real fear. Edson, 68 kilometer. The exact same distance, 3 times now. 3 signs over nearly an hour of driving, and every one of them claimed Edson was 68 kilometers away. Thomas's breathing quickened. His palms grew sweaty on the steering wheel. He checked the landscape outside, looking for landmarks, anything that would confirm he was making progress. But the forest looked identical in every direction. The same dense trees, the same darkness between their trunks, the same shadows flowing past his headlights. He looked for variations in the road itself. A pothole he could remember, a patch of repair work, anything distinctive. But Highway 16 appeared perfectly maintained here, the pavement smooth and unmarked. At 2:57 a.m., Thomas passed another sign, Edson, 68 kilometer. Okay, Thomas said aloud, his voice sounding thin in the cab. Okay, think. What's happening here? He was driving in a loop somehow. The signs weren't wrong. He genuinely wasn't making progress toward Edson. But how? Highway 16 was a straight road here. No curves, no turnoffs. He'd been heading due east for over an hour. His compass, a simple magnetic unit mounted on his dash, confirmed he was traveling east. His GPS showed steady progress, but the signs said otherwise. Thomas made a decision. He'd slow down, drive more carefully, watch for any side roads or turnoffs he might be unconsciously taking. He reduced his speed to 60 kilometers per hour, his eyes scanning the roadside constantly. The forest continued unbroken. The white line at the road's edge stretched ahead perfectly straight. No intersections appeared, no side roads, nothing but the endless corridor of highway through the trees. At 3:14 a.m., Edson 68 kilometers. At 3:31 a.m., Edson 68 kilometers. At 3:49 a.m., Edson 68 kilometers. Thomas pulled over to the shoulder, his hands shaking as he shifted into park. His fuel gauge read 3/4 full, the exact same level it had shown when he left Hinton nearly 2 hours ago. He'd been driving continuously. The engine had been burning diesel. But the gauge showed no change. He grabbed his phone. Still no signal. His GPS still showed progress. According to the map, he should be just 10 kilometers west of Edson now. But when he looked at the GPS track, the line showing where he'd been, something impossible appeared. The track showed him driving forward for a while, then suddenly jumping back to a previous position, then forward again, then back. The green line looped over itself like a tangled string, showing a path that couldn't exist in normal space. Thomas opened his door and stepped out of the truck. The night air was cold, his breath misting. He walked to the back of his trailer, checking it by the light of his phone's flashlight. The lumber was still there, properly secured, undisturbed. Everything appeared normal. He looked east, down Highway 16. The road stretched into darkness, disappearing between the trees. He looked west. Identical view, the same road, the same trees, the same darkness. Thomas pulled out a pen and a receipt from his pocket. On the back he wrote, 3:54 a.m., stopped on shoulder. Edson 68 kilometers, fuel 3.4. GPS says I'm near Edson. Signs say I'm nowhere. He got back in his truck, set the receipt on his dashboard where he could see it, and pulled back onto the highway. He'd drive exactly 10 kilometers by his odometer, no more, no less, and see what sign appeared. The odometer ticked upward, 0.1 kilometer, 0.2 kilometer, 0.3 kilometer. Thomas watched it obsessively, ignoring the landscape outside. At exactly 10.0 kilometers, a sign appeared in his headlights. Edson, 68 kilometers. He'd driven 10 kilometers and made zero progress. That was physically impossible. Unless he wasn't traveling through normal space. Unless the road itself was doing something, bending somehow, looping back on itself in a way that shouldn't be possible for a straight highway. Thomas thought about science fiction stories he'd read about wormholes and space folding. But those were fiction. This was real. He was sitting in his truck on Highway 16 in Alberta, not in some science fiction universe. At 4:11 a.m., Thomas noticed something new. The trees on either side of the road had changed, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but changed nonetheless. Earlier, they'd been the typical boreal mix, spruce, pine, some birch. Now they all looked the same. Every single tree was identical in height, in branch structure, in the way they leaned slightly toward the road. It was like driving past the same tree repeated infinitely. Thomas's heart rate accelerated. His breathing became shallow. He recognized these symptoms. Panic attack. He'd experienced one years ago after a near-miss accident. He forced himself to breathe slowly, deeply. Panicking wouldn't help. He needed to think clearly. What if he stopped looking at the signs? What if he just drove until his fuel ran out? Or until he reached somewhere, anywhere, other than this endless stretch of identical road? He checked his fuel gauge. Still 3/4 full. He had enough diesel to drive for hours, maybe another 500 or 600 kilometers under normal circumstances. He'd drive until something changed. Thomas drove. The odometer climbed 100 kilometers since Hinton. 200, 300. The signs continued appearing at regular intervals. Edson 68 kilometers. Edson 68 kilometer. Edson 68 kilometer. His fuel gauge never changed. His GPS showed impossible paths. His CB radio stayed silent. At 5:47 a.m., the sun should have been rising. Thomas checked the time repeatedly, watching the minutes tick toward dawn. But outside, the darkness didn't change. No hint of light appeared on the eastern horizon. The night continued, absolute and unchanging. Thomas's mind began showing strain. He'd been driving for nearly 7 hours now, stuck in this impossible loop, watching the same signs, the same trees, the same empty road. He started talking to himself, narrating his actions to maintain a sense of reality. Odometer shows 412 kilometers since Hinton. Fuel gauge, still 3/4, time is 5:52 a.m. Sun should be coming up, it's not. Something is very wrong here, something is very, very wrong. At 6:15 a.m., Thomas saw lights ahead. For a moment, hope surged through him, a town, another vehicle, anything indicating the end of this nightmare. But as he approached, the lights resolved into a familiar pattern. Hinton. The same gas stations, the same buildings, the exact same configuration he'd driven through 5 hours ago. Thomas drove through Hinton, his eyes scanning for anything different. Every detail matched his memory perfectly. Same vehicles parked at the gas stations. Same lights in the windows. Same everything. He passed the east end of Hinton and continued onto Highway 16. A sign appeared. Edson 72 kilometer. He was back at the beginning. 5 hours of driving, over 400 kilometers, and he'd somehow looped back to his starting point. The route that should take an hour had become an infinite circuit with no exit. Thomas pulled over again. His hands were trembling uncontrollably now. His mind felt fractured, reality slipping away like water through his fingers. He tried the CB radio one more time. "This is Thomas Brennan in a Peterbilt hauling lumber. If anyone can hear me, I'm stuck in some kind of loop on Highway 16. I've been driving for 5 hours and I'm back where I started. If anyone is out there, please respond." The CB crackled. Then faintly a voice. "Thomas Brennan, we hear you. Stay calm. We're coming to get you." "Who is this?" Thomas demanded. "How do you know my name?" "We've been monitoring CB chatter," the voice said. It sounded male, calm, professional. "You're not in any danger. There's a phenomenon that occurs occasionally on Highway 16. We're aware of it. Just stay where you are. A vehicle will reach you shortly." "What phenomenon? What's happening?" "We'll explain when we reach you. For now, just remain stopped. Don't drive further. You're safer staying in one location." The voice cut off. Thomas sat there, engine idling, watching the road ahead and behind. Who were they? Government? Military? Some organization that knew about impossible loops in highway? 20 minutes later, headlights appeared from the east. A vehicle approached, a black SUV with tinted windows, no markings. It pulled up beside Thomas's truck and 2 people got out, both wearing dark clothes, both carrying what looked like electronic equipment. A woman approached his driver's side window. She looked to be in her 40s with short gray hair and an expression that was professionally neutral. "Mr. Brennan? I'm Dr. Elise Morrison. We're with a research group that studies anomalous phenomena on Alberta highways. Can you step down, please?" Thomas hesitated, then opened his door and climbed down. His legs felt weak after sitting for so long. Dr. Morrison held up a device that looked like a modified tablet. She aimed it at Thomas, at his truck, at the road around them. Numbers scrolled across the screen. "You've been in the loop for 6 hours and 43 minutes, she said. "You're experiencing what we call a closed temporal path. Essentially, you've been traveling through the same section of highway repeatedly. The road hasn't been looping in space. It's been looping in time. That's impossible, Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. After what he'd experienced, calling anything impossible seemed naive. We don't fully understand it either, Dr. Morrison admitted. But it happens roughly 3 to 4 times per year on Highway 16, always in this specific location, always during specific conditions. We've been studying it for 12 years. How do I get out? We'll guide you out. The loop has boundaries. If you follow our vehicle, we can navigate to the edge and pull you free. It'll take about 30 minutes. Thomas followed them. The SUV led the way, and Thomas kept his truck close behind, not daring to lose sight of those taillights. They drove east, and this time the landscape began to change. The identical trees started showing variation. The road curved slightly instead of remaining perfectly straight. And eventually a sign appeared that read, Edson 45 km. Thomas nearly cried with relief. 37 minutes later, they reached Edson. Dr. Morrison's SUV pulled into a rest stop, and Thomas followed. She approached his truck again. You're free of it now, she said. You can continue to Edmonton if you want, or rest here. Your choice. What caused it? Thomas asked. Why did that happen? Dr. Morrison shook her head. We have theories, nothing confirmed, space-time anomalies, quantum fluctuations. Some researchers think it's related to geomagnetic fields. Others believe it's something else entirely, something we don't have physics for yet. She handed Thomas a card with a phone number. If it happens again, call this number immediately. We monitor these situations, but we can't be everywhere. You were lucky we picked up your CB transmission. Thomas took the card. Has anyone ever been stuck permanently? Dr. Morrison's expression darkened. 3 cases, all before we started active monitoring. They eventually ran out of food and water. Their bodies were found inside their vehicles, still on Highway 16, still in the loop. We try very hard to prevent that now. Thomas drove to Edmonton in a daze. He delivered his lumber load, filed a report that mentioned mechanical delays but nothing about loops or anomalies, and drove home. He took a week off, unpaid, and spent it trying to process what had happened. He never told anyone outside Dr. Morrison's research group about his experience. When other truckers asked why he'd been so late with that delivery, he blamed truck trouble. No one questioned it. But Thomas never drove Highway 16 at night again. He rerouted, taking longer paths that added hours to his trips. He didn't care about the lost time or the reduced efficiency. He'd seen what could happen on that road, experienced the horror of being trapped in a loop with no exit, driving forever through the same darkness toward a destination that never grew closer. And sometimes, late at night, Thomas would wake from dreams where he was still there, still driving, watching the odometer climb while the signs repeated endlessly. Edson, 68 km. Edson, 68 km. Edson, 68 km forever. Story 5. The Mirror Truck. Samantha Rodriguez had hauled fuel for Apex Energy Transport for 8 years, specializing in the dangerous goods routes that most drivers avoided. Tanker work required extra certification, constant vigilance, and nerves that could handle the knowledge that you were pulling 40,000 liters of volatile liquid behind you. On July 22, 2019, Samantha was assigned a solo run from a refinery near Fort Saskatchewan to a remote mining operation north of Fort McMurray. A 14-hour journey through some of Alberta's most isolated territory. She'd made this run 24 times without incident. But on this particular night, somewhere on Highway 63, Samantha encountered something that made her question whether she understood reality at all. Another truck that seemed to be her own reflection, following her through the darkness with intentions she couldn't fathom. The run started normally. Samantha performed her pre-trip inspection meticulously, checking every seal, every valve, every safety system on her Mac tanker. Fuel hauling left no room for error. She departed the refinery at 9:47 p.m., her truck loaded with diesel destined for the mining operations fleet vehicles. The July evening was warm, the sky still holding on to the last traces of sunset. In summer this far north, twilight lasted for hours. Highway 63 in summer was a different beast than its winter incarnation. No ice, no blinding snow, but plenty of its own hazards. Wildlife, construction zones, and the constant flow of heavy equipment trucks serving the oil sands. Samantha stayed alert, scanning the ditches for deer and moose, watching for the telltale reflection of animal eyes in her headlights. By midnight, true darkness had finally arrived. Samantha had passed through Boyle, Lac La Biche, and was now in the deep wilderness section of the highway where towns became sparse and the forest pressed close. Her CB radio carried occasional chatter, but traffic had thinned to the point where she sometimes went 20 minutes without seeing another vehicle. At 12:34 a.m., Samantha noticed headlights in her mirror, another truck maybe 2 kilometers back traveling north like her. She felt the usual relief that came with having company on these remote stretches. The headlights maintained their distance, neither closing nor falling back. 30 minutes later, the headlights were still there. Same distance. Samantha had adjusted her speed several times, slowing for curves, accelerating on straight sections, but the truck behind her matched every change perfectly. It was uncanny precision, the kind that suggested the driver was deliberately pacing her. Samantha picked up her CB. "This is northbound tanker hauling diesel, mile marker 312. Got a Smoky Bear pacing me or just good company tonight?" Static. No response. But the CB should be working. She'd heard chatter less than 15 minutes ago. She tried again. "Northbound tanker to the truck behind me, you copy?" Still nothing. Samantha frowned, checking her CB. All the lights showed green. The unit appeared functional, but the truck behind her wasn't responding. She watched her mirrors more carefully. Now that she was paying attention, something seemed odd about those headlights. They were spaced the same width as her own truck's headlights. They sat at the same height. In fact, in the darkness, they looked exactly like what she'd expect to see if she were somehow looking at her own truck's lights. That was ridiculous, of course. Lots of trucks had similar headlight configurations. Samantha shook off the thought and focused on the road ahead. At 1:15 a.m., Samantha crested a hill and started down a long, straight section of highway. Her speedometer showed 90 kilometers per hour. In her mirror, the headlights behind her crested the same hill. And that's when Samantha saw something that made her breath catch. In the brief illumination from her trailer's running lights, she caught a glimpse of the truck behind her. It was a Mac tanker, white, with the same company logo on the door, the same configuration as her own truck, identical. Samantha's hands tightened on the wheel. Apex Energy Transport had a fleet of about 40 trucks, many of them Mac tankers, many of them white. It wasn't impossible that another company truck would be on the same highway. But she hadn't been notified of any other fuel shipments on this route tonight. Dispatch usually coordinated to avoid having multiple hazmat loads on remote highways simultaneously. Safety protocol. She grabbed her CB again. "This is Unit 17 for Apex Energy. Is there another Apex truck on Highway 63 northbound? Anyone from company copy?" No response. But now Samantha noticed something that made her stomach clench with real fear. Her radio's display, which should show the channel number, instead showed strings of numbers that made no sense. 1917, 1917, 1917, flickering rapidly. Her truck number was 17. The repeating pattern felt deliberately ominous. Samantha tried her cell phone. No signal, expected this far north. But even the no-service indicator looked wrong. The bars on her screen flickered in and out of existence like they couldn't decide whether she had signal or not. She focused on driving, trying to ignore the headlights in her mirror. Maybe it was another company truck. Maybe the driver's CB was broken. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. At 1:43 a.m., Samantha passed through a construction zone. Traffic cones narrowed the highway to one lane, forcing her to slow to 60 kilometers per hour. She glanced in her mirror, expecting the truck behind her to slow as well. It didn't. The headlights maintained their speed, closing the distance rapidly. Too rapidly. "Hey!" Samantha shouted uselessly, watching in her mirror as the truck behind her approached at highway speed despite the construction zone. "Slow down, you idiot!" The truck came closer. 50 meters, 30 meters, 20 meters. Close enough now that Samantha could see details in the glow of her trailer's lights. It was her truck. Not just the same model, not just the same company, it was her truck. Same license plate. Same small dent in the front bumper from where she'd scraped a loading dock pole 2 years ago. Same crack in the windshield from a rock strike last month. Impossible. Samantha was driving her truck. She could feel the steering wheel under her hands, see her own instruments on the dash. But behind her, identical in every detail, her truck followed. The mirror truck closed to within 10 meters. At that distance, Samantha could see the driver through the windshield. A woman. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Wearing an Apex Energy uniform shirt. Wearing Samantha's face. Samantha's heart hammered against her ribs. Her breathing came in short, rapid gasps. This wasn't real, couldn't be real. Hallucination, maybe. Fatigue? Had she fallen asleep at the wheel and this was a nightmare? She pinched her arm hard enough to leave a mark. Pain flared. She was awake. This was happening. The construction zone ended. Samantha accelerated hard, pushing her truck up to 110 kilometers per hour. Faster than safe for a loaded tanker, but she didn't care. She had to get away from that thing behind her. The mirror truck matched her speed exactly. No matter how fast Samantha drove, it maintained that 10-meter distance. Never closer, never farther. And the driver, the thing wearing Samantha's face, stared at her through the windshield with an expression that looked like hunger. At 2:07 a.m., Samantha's fuel gauge started acting strangely. She had 3/4 of a tank when she left the refinery, enough to make the run with a comfortable margin. But now the needle was dropping. 3/4, half, quarter, eighth. The low fuel warning light blazed red. That was impossible. Her truck's tank held 500 liters. She couldn't have burned through 300 liters in 2 hours. Unless something was draining her fuel. Unless the mirror truck was somehow feeding off her. Samantha's GPS started malfunctioning. The screen showed her position, then showed 2 positions, 2 trucks in the exact same location, overlapping icons that flickered in and out of sync. The map itself began distorting, roads bending into impossible curves, geographic features appearing that shouldn't exist. "Okay," Samantha said aloud, her voice shaking. "Okay, think, what do I do?" She couldn't outrun it. She couldn't call for help. She couldn't even prove this was happening. If anyone saw them on the road, they'd just see 2 Apex tankers traveling together. Nothing unusual. At 2:23 a.m., Samantha made a decision. There was a rest stop ahead at mile marker 387. A small pull-off with bathroom facilities and a picnic area. She'd stop there. In the light, with a chance to physically see the mirror truck, maybe she could understand what was happening. She signaled her turn, watching in bizarre fascination as the mirror truck's signal light activated simultaneously and pulled into the rest stop. Sodium vapor lights illuminated the area with harsh orange light. Samantha brought her truck to a stop near the bathroom building. The mirror truck pulled in behind her, stopping exactly where Samantha's truck would stop if reversed through time, parked in perfect symmetry. Samantha's door opened, not because she opened it. It just swung wide, as if pulled by invisible hands. She sat frozen, watching in her driver's side mirror as the mirror truck's door also opened. The other Samantha climbed down. She moved with exact synchronization, every motion a perfect reflection of what Samantha would do. She walked toward Samantha's truck, her feet making no sound on the pavement, her expression still showing that hungry, empty look. Samantha's body moved without her conscious control. She found herself climbing down from her cab, her movement synchronized with the approaching figure. They walked toward each other, two identical women in a pool of orange light, surrounded by darkness and forest. They stopped 1 meter apart, close enough for Samantha to see every detail. The mirror Samantha was perfect. Same scars, same freckles, same small mole on the right cheek. But her eyes were wrong. They didn't reflect light properly. They looked flat, dead, like photographs of eyes rather than living things. The mirror Samantha reached out. Her hand moved toward Samantha's chest, fingers extending like she wanted to touch, to push, to reach inside. Samantha jerked backward, breaking whatever spell had controlled her movements. "No," she said, "no. You're not real. You're not me." The mirror Samantha's expression changed. The hunger became rage. Her mouth opened, and a sound came out. Samantha's own voice, but wrong, distorted, multiple versions speaking at once. "I am real. I am you. I have always been you. This is my truck, my life, my route." "You're not taking it," Samantha said. She backed toward her truck, hands fumbling for the door handle. The mirror Samantha lunged. Her movements were too fast, too fluid, no longer bound by human limitations. She crossed the distance in a fraction of a second, her hand reaching for Samantha's throat. Samantha twisted away, throwing herself into her cab. She slammed the door, hitting the lock button. Through the window, she saw the mirror Samantha standing there, staring with those flat, dead eyes. Then the mirror Samantha smiled. It wasn't a human expression. Too wide, too many teeth. Samantha started her engine and threw the truck into gear. She accelerated out of the rest stop, tires screeching on the pavement, not caring about safety protocols or proper driving technique. She just needed to escape. In her mirror, the mirror truck's engine started simultaneously. It followed her out of the rest stop, maintaining that same perfect distance. Samantha drove. The fuel gauge continued dropping. 8th tank, 16th empty. The warning chime sounded, but the engine kept running, burning fuel that didn't exist, pulling power from somewhere impossible. At 3:12 a.m., Samantha saw lights ahead. Fort McMurray, civilization. The mining operation was on the city's outskirts. If she could reach it, reach people, reach witnesses, maybe this nightmare would end. She pushed her speed to 130 kilometers per hour. The mirror truck matched her. They raced through the darkness, two identical tankers hauling identical loads, one driven by a human, one driven by something else. The city lights grew closer. Samantha could see individual buildings now, street lights, the glow of 24-hour businesses. Almost there, almost safe. At exactly 3:31 a.m., as Samantha crossed the Fort McMurray city limits, the mirror truck vanished. Not gradually, it simply ceased to exist between one moment and the next. Samantha's mirrors showed empty highway behind her. No headlights, no vehicle, nothing. Her fuel gauge jumped back to 3/4 full. Her GPS showed a single truck icon. Her CB radio display returned to normal. Samantha pulled over at the first gas station she saw, a Petro-Canada on the city's south side. She sat there, engine running, hands trembling on the wheel. She checked her mirrors compulsively for the next 20 minutes, but nothing appeared. Finally, she drove the remaining distance to the mining operation. She delivered her fuel load, got her paperwork signed, and immediately called dispatch. She told them she wasn't feeling well, that she needed to deadhead back to Edmonton empty and take some time off. Dispatch agreed without argument, unusual for them, but Samantha didn't question it. She just wanted to go home. She never mentioned the mirror truck to anyone. What could she say? That she'd been followed by a duplicate of herself? That something had tried to steal her identity, her truck, her life? No one would believe her. They'd think she'd had a breakdown, maybe recommend psychological evaluation and suspension of her dangerous goods certification. But Samantha knew what she'd experienced was real. And 3 months later, when she saw a news story about a fatal accident on Highway 63, another fuel tanker, another Apex Energy driver killed when their truck inexplicably left the road and rolled, Samantha wondered. She looked at the driver's photo in the article. A man, not a woman. But his eyes in the photo looked wrong. Flat, dead, like photographs. Samantha quit her job with Apex Energy after that. She took a dispatcher position, working from an office where she coordinated routes but never drove them herself. She never told anyone why she'd left driving, why she'd given up a job she'd loved. But sometimes, late at night when she was alone, Samantha would catch her reflection in a window or a mirror, and for just a moment she'd see something wrong with it. Her reflection would move a fraction of a second too late. Or its expression would be slightly off, or its eyes would look flat and dead. And Samantha would wonder if the mirror Samantha had really vanished that night, or if it was just waiting, watching, looking for another chance to reach out and take what it wanted. The thought that somewhere in the darkness a duplicate of her still existed, still drove a truck identical to her old one, still wore her face, still hunted for the life it thought should be its own, kept Samantha from ever feeling completely safe again. Story 6. The Frozen Voice. Raymond Nakamura had specialized in winter hauling for Trans-Canada Logistics for 11 years, running loads through Alberta's harshest conditions when other drivers stayed home. Ice, blizzards, -40 temperatures. Raymond had worked through them all. On January 8, 2017, he was assigned an overnight run from Calgary to Grande Prairie, hauling industrial equipment. The forecast predicted brutal cold, temperatures dropping to -45 Celsius. But Raymond's Freightliner was equipped with cold weather packages and auxiliary heating. He'd driven in worse. The first 8 hours passed without incident, but when Raymond stopped at a lonely truck stop north of Valley View at 2:30 a.m. to refuel and grab coffee, he encountered something that would haunt him for years, a voice on his CB radio calling for help, growing progressively more desperate as the night wore on. But the voice wasn't coming from another driver on the road. It was coming from somewhere else entirely, somewhere cold and dark and impossible. The truck stop was one of those isolated outposts that dot Alberta's northern highways, a single building housing a gas station, restaurant, and trucker's lounge, surrounded by empty darkness for dozens of kilometers in every direction. At 2:30 a.m. on a January night with the temperature at -43 Celsius, Raymond's truck was the only vehicle in the parking lot. He fueled up, the diesel flowing sluggishly in the extreme cold, and headed inside for coffee. The woman behind the counter looked exhausted, her name tag reading Denise. She poured him a large coffee without being asked, the universal trucker's order. "Quiet night," Raymond said, making small talk. "Dead quiet," Denise replied. "You're the first vehicle in 2 hours, highway's empty. Weather's keeping everyone home." "Smart people," Denise said with a tired smile. "You heading north?" "Grande Prairie. Should be there by 6 if the roads stay clear. They're forecasting it'll drop to -50 by dawn. Be careful." Raymond nodded, paid for his coffee, and headed back to his truck. The cold hit him like a physical blow when he stepped outside, the kind of cold that seared the lungs, that turned exposed skin numb in seconds. He climbed into his cab quickly, grateful for the lingering warmth. He pulled out of the truck stop at 2:52 a.m., his headlights cutting through darkness so complete it felt solid. This far north in winter, sunrise wouldn't come until after 9 a.m. Raymond settled in for another 4 hours of night driving. At 3:17 a.m., his CB radio crackled. "This is anyone hearing this? I need help." The voice was male, young, distorted by static. But beneath the interference, Raymond could hear genuine distress. He grabbed his CB. "This is northbound Freightliner passing mile marker 512. I copy you. What's your 20? Static. Then, "Cold, can't feel, help. What's your location?" Raymond tried again. "Where are you?" "Highway, north of," stopped. The transmission broke up. Raymond adjusted his squelch, trying to clear the signal. "Say again your location. Are you broken down? Do you need a tow?" No response. Just static. Raymond checked his mirrors. Empty highway behind him. Empty highway ahead. If another driver was in trouble out here in this temperature, they had maybe an hour before hypothermia became critical. Less if their truck had lost heat entirely. He tried again. "Driver in distress, this is northbound Freightliner. If you can hear me, try to give me landmarks. What's your last known position?" The CB crackled again. "Valley View. Stopped for fuel, but now." "You stopped at the Valley View truck stop?" That was the place Raymond had just left. "When did you stop there?" "Just 20 minutes. Raymond's chest tightened. He'd been at that truck stop 20 minutes ago. There'd been no other vehicles. Denise had said he was the first vehicle in 2 hours. But this driver was claiming he'd just been there. "What's your truck type?" Raymond asked. "What company?" "Kenworth. Blue. Polar Transport." "Okay," Raymond said, keeping his voice calm and professional. "I just left that truck stop. I'm heading back. Stay in your cab. Keep your emergency flashers on. Keep whatever heat you have running. I'll find you." Raymond checked his GPS, looking for a place to turn around. The highway here had no median breaks, just a solid stretch of pavement between ditches and forest. He'd have to continue for another 3 kilometers to a turnaround point. The CB crackled again. "Can't, truck won't start, battery dead, so cold." The voice sounded weaker now, the words slurring. Hypothermia was setting in. Raymond pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing his truck to 130 kilometers per hour. Dangerously fast in these conditions, but a life was at stake. "Hang on," Raymond transmitted. "I'm coming. Keep talking to me. What's your name?" David Chen, from Edmonton." "Okay, David, I'm Raymond. I'm going to get you out of this. How long has your truck been dead?" 10 minutes. Tried to restart. Nothing. Losing heat fast." Raymond reached the turnaround, swung his truck around in a wide arc, and headed back south. The truck stop was maybe 12 minutes away at this speed. He'd get there, find this David Chen, get him into his own truck's warm cab, and either jump-start his vehicle or call for proper emergency services. At 3:34 a.m., Raymond pulled into the truck stop parking lot. Empty, completely empty. The same as when he'd left. He drove around the entire lot, checking every corner, every potential parking spot. No blue Kenworth, no vehicle of any kind. Just his own truck and empty pavement dusted with ice crystals that sparkled in his headlights. Raymond grabbed his CB. "David, I'm at the truck stop. I don't see you. Where exactly are you parked?" Static. Then, pumps. Near the pumps. Can see the building lights. Raymond was near the pumps. He could see the building lights. But there was no other truck. A chill ran down Raymond's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. He got out of his truck, leaving it running, and walked around the pumps. Nothing. He checked the restaurant. Through the windows, he could see Denise at the counter alone, reading a magazine. No one else inside. Raymond went in. The warmth hit him immediately, almost painful after the extreme cold. Denise looked up. Forget something? Have you seen any other trucks? Raymond asked. A blue Kenworth driver named David Chen? Denise frowned. No. Like I said, you're the first vehicle in 2 hours. Why? I'm getting CB transmissions from someone claiming he's broken down here. Denise's expression changed, something guarded entering her eyes. What frequency? Channel 19, standard trucker channel. She set down her magazine carefully. What's the voice saying? Raymond repeated the transmissions. As he spoke, Denise's face went pale. How long have you been getting these calls? She asked. Since I left here 40 minutes ago. Denise was quiet for a long moment, then, come here. I need to show you something. She led Raymond to a back office, a small room with a desk, filing cabinets, and a wall covered with newspaper clippings. Denise pointed to one article dated January 9, 2014, exactly 3 years and 1 day ago. The headline read, Trucker Found Dead in Disabled Vehicle Near Valley View. Raymond read the article. David Chen, age 27, from Edmonton, driving for Polar Transport. He'd stopped at this truck stop for fuel. His truck, a blue Kenworth, had suffered electrical failure when he tried to restart it. In minus 45-degree temperatures with no heat, Chen had frozen to death in his cab. His body was found 12 hours later. He's been calling every year, Denise said quietly. Every January 8th into the 9th. Same transmission, same desperate calls for help. Different drivers pick them up on CB. Some try to find him like you did, but there's nothing to find. He's been dead for 3 years. Raymond stared at the article, his mind refusing to process what she was saying. That's impossible. I know what you heard, Denise said. I've talked to 5 drivers over the past 3 years who've picked up those transmissions. All of them say the same thing. A voice calling for help, claiming to be stranded at this truck stop, but there's never anyone here. Raymond's hands trembled. He'd heard that voice. It had been real, physical, transmitted through his CB radio's speaker. Not imagination, not hallucination. Why? Raymond asked. Why does this happen? I don't know, Denise said, but it only happens on this date in this temperature range to drivers heading north. Something about the condition. It's like the night is replaying. Or maybe he's still out there somehow, still calling, still hoping someone will save him. Raymond's CB radio crackled from outside. He'd left his truck running, door open, CB on. Both he and Denise heard it clearly. Please, anyone, so cold, can't feel anything, please. The voice was weaker now, fading, the words barely intelligible beneath the static. Raymond walked back to his truck slowly. He picked up the CB handset, knowing it was futile, but unable to stop himself. David, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I can't help you, you're not here anymore. The static intensified, and through it, as if from a vast distance, came a final transmission. I know, but thank you for trying, so cold, so cold. Then silence, complete silence. The CB went quiet, not even the usual background static remained. It was as if the channel had been completely emptied of sound. Raymond stood there in the truck stop parking lot, minus 45-degree air burning his lungs, staring at his CB radio. He thought about David Chen, 27 years old, freezing to death in a disabled truck while calling for help that never came. He thought about those final hours, the temperature dropping, the cold creeping in, the gradual shutdown of body and mind. And he thought about the fact that every year on this date, in these conditions, that night replayed somehow. David Chen's voice reached out through time or space or whatever boundary separated life from death, still calling, still hoping, still dying. Raymond got back in his truck. He didn't return to the highway immediately. He sat there for 20 minutes, heater running, trying to process what he'd experienced. Finally, he grabbed his CB one more time. David Chen, Raymond transmitted. If you can still hear me, I want you to know that people tried to help you that night. The failure wasn't yours. You did everything right. The truck failed you. The weather failed you. But you didn't fail. I hope you find peace. No response. Raymond hadn't expected one, but he felt better for saying it. He drove to Grande Prairie and completed his delivery. He filed his report without mentioning the CB transmissions. What would he say? That he'd spoken with a ghost? That a dead man had asked him for help? But Raymond researched David Chen when he got home. He found the full story. Chen had been a rookie driver only 6 months with Polar Transport. He'd stopped at the truck stop at 2:30 a.m., the exact time Raymond had stopped. His truck had suffered an electrical failure caused by a faulty alternator, a defect that should have been caught during maintenance but was missed. Chen had used his cell phone to call for help, but the extreme temperature had drained his battery quickly. His last call to 911 was logged at 3:47 a.m. Emergency services had been dispatched, but the nearest tow truck was over an hour away. By the time help arrived, Chen had been dead for 3 hours. Raymond learned that Chen had a fiancée, parents in Edmonton, a younger sister. He'd been saving money to buy a house. He'd been planning to propose officially that Valentine's Day. All of that ended in a disabled truck in the worst cold of winter. Raymond never drove past that truck stop on January 8th again. He rerouted, adding hours to his trips to avoid being on that stretch of highway on that date. He couldn't help David Chen. No one could anymore. But he couldn't bear the thought of hearing that voice again, that desperate plea from someone trapped in a nightmare that replayed eternally. Other drivers have reported the transmissions over the years. Some stop to search like Raymond did. Others listen in horror, then drive on, trying to convince themselves they imagined it. The truck stop staff know the story now. When January 8th arrives and the temperature drops to the -40s, Denise and the other workers wait, listening to their own CB radio, hearing the calls that come like clockwork. This is, anyone hearing this? I need help. Always the same, always desperate, always ending the same way with that final transmission about the cold. Raymond retired from long-haul trucking 2 years ago. He works local routes now, home every night, never driving through the darkest hours. But sometimes in the dead of winter, when the temperature drops and the wind howls, Raymond wakes from dreams where he's driving through endless darkness. His CB radio crackling with a voice calling for help, a voice he can hear but can never reach. And he wonders if David Chen is still out there in some form, still trapped in that disabled truck, still calling into the void and hoping someone will answer, someone will save him from the cold that never ends. Story 7. The Wrong Exit. Elena Vasquez had been driving for Mountain Star Freight for 6 years, primarily hauling electronics from distribution centers in Calgary to retailers throughout central and northern Alberta. She prided herself on her navigational skills. In an era where most drivers relied entirely on GPS, Elena still kept paper maps and knew her routes by memory. On September 15, 2021, she departed Calgary at 7:00 p.m. with a load of computers and televisions destined for a big-box retailer in Lloydminster, a 4-hour drive east on Highway 16. The route was straightforward, one Elena had driven at least 50 times. But somewhere between Wainwright and Lloydminster, in a section of highway she knew intimately, Elena took an exit that shouldn't exist, an exit that led to a version of Alberta she'd never seen before and would desperately wish to forget. The evening started perfectly. September in Alberta meant comfortable temperatures and that particular quality of light that made the prairie landscape glow golden. Elena drove with her windows cracked, letting in fresh air that smelled of harvest and earth. She passed through Calgary's eastern suburbs, through Strathmore, past the massive wind farms that lined the highway, their blades turning slowly against the sunset. By 10:00 p.m., Elena was approaching Wainwright. The town's lights appeared on the horizon, a welcome cluster of civilization in the darkness. She considered stopping for coffee but decided to push through. Only about 90 minutes to Lloydminster, and she wanted to complete the delivery and head home. The GPS showed her route clearly. Continue east on Highway 16. Straight shot, no turns until the Lloydminster exit. Simple. At 10:27 p.m., Elena noticed an exit sign illuminated in her headlights. Meridian, 2 kilometers. She frowned. There was no town called Meridian on this stretch of highway. She'd driven this route dozens of times. She knew every exit, every town, every landmark. This sign shouldn't exist. Elena checked her GPS. It showed no exit here, just the continuous line of Highway 16 stretching east. But the sign was clearly visible. Standard Alberta transportation design, professional and official looking. Curiosity pulled at her. Maybe it was a new development, a small town she'd never heard of. Alberta had hundreds of tiny settlements scattered across the prairie. Perhaps Meridian was one, of them too small to appear on GPS maps. She made an impulsive decision. She'd take the exit, loop through town, satisfy her curiosity, and get back on the highway. A 5-minute detour. Nothing significant. The exit ramp curved south, the pavement smooth and new. Elena followed it, her truck's headlights showing a well-maintained road that led into darkness. No lights visible ahead, no glow on the horizon that would indicate a town. After 1 kilometer, Elena began to feel uneasy. There should be something by now. Streetlights, buildings, signs of habitation. But the road stretched empty through featureless prairie, the landscape visible only in the narrow cone of her headlights. At exactly 2 kilometers, the town appeared. Not gradually, not with the usual progression of outskirts growing into developed areas. It simply appeared as if Elena's truck had passed through an invisible boundary between empty prairie and full town. Meridian was larger than she'd expected. The main street showed dozens of businesses, restaurants, shops, a grocery store, a gas station, even a movie theater. Every building was lit, their signs glowing. But Elena saw no people, no vehicles on the street, no movement in any windows. She drove slowly down the main street looking for someone, anyone. The businesses appeared open, doors unlocked, lights on, but completely abandoned. A restaurant called the Prairie Rose showed tables set with silverware and napkins as if waiting for diners who never arrived. A grocery store's automatic doors stood open, but the interior was empty of customers and staff. Elena's unease deepened. This wasn't normal. Even a small town at 10:30 p.m. should show some signs of life. A late-night worker, a police patrol, teenagers out after dark. But Meridian showed nothing. She decided to turn around, get back to Highway 16, forget this strange detour. She'd driven about 6 blocks down the main street, time to find a place to turn her truck around and head back. But when Elena tried to turn, she found the streets didn't work the way they should. She turned right onto what appeared to be a side street, planning to circle the block and return to the main street heading the opposite direction. But the side street curved, bent, and deposited her back onto the main street heading the same direction she'd been going. East, deeper into town. She tried again, turning left this time. Same result. The streets curved and looped in ways that defied the grid pattern she'd seen from the main street, always returning her to the same eastward path. Elena's breathing quickened. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. This wasn't right. Streets didn't work this way. Topology didn't work this way. She tried a 3-point turn in the middle of the main street, physically pointing her truck west. But when she completed the turn and started driving, the street itself seemed to curve. Her compass, a simple, magnetic unit on her dashboard, showed she was heading west, but the buildings outside her window continued flowing past as if she were going east. "Okay," Elena said aloud, forcing her voice to stay calm. "Okay." Something is very wrong here. She spotted the movie theater ahead. Its marquee showed current films, movies Elena recognized from recent releases. The box office window was lit, but no one sat inside. The electronic display announced showtimes: 7 p.m., 9:15 p.m., 11:30 p.m. It was 10:43 p.m. If the schedule was accurate, people should be watching the 9:15 showing. But Elena saw no cars in the theater's parking lot. She pulled her truck into the parking lot, or tried to. But as she turned the wheel, her truck continued straight down the main street, as if the parking lot entrance didn't exist for her. Elena stomped on the brakes. The truck slowed but didn't stop. It rolled forward at maybe 10 kilometers per hour. Regardless of how hard she pressed the brake pedal, Elena shifted into park. The transmission engaged, but the truck kept moving, that same slow roll east down the main street. "No," Elena whispered. "No, no, no." She tried her cell phone. No signal. Her CB radio produced only static, not even the ambient noise of distant transmissions, just pure white noise. Her GPS screen had frozen, showing her position still on Highway 16, as if this detour had never happened. The town continued around her, block after block of businesses, houses, structures that all appeared normal but were fundamentally wrong. Elena noticed the details now. Every building was slightly too perfect. No wear on the paint, no cracks in the sidewalks, no litter or leaves or any of the small imperfections that marked real places. And no people. Never any people. Elena's truck rolled past a police station. The lights were on. Police cars parked outside, but no officers visible. Past a hospital, its emergency room lit and clearly operational, but empty. Past a school, its windows showing classrooms with desks and chalkboards and educational posters, but no students, no teachers. At 11:17 p.m., Elena passed a sign. "You are leaving Meridian. Come again soon." Relief flooded through her. The exit, finally. She'd be back on the prairie, back on Highway 16, back in the real world. But beyond the sign, the town continued. More buildings, more empty streets, more perfect structures with no inhabitants. The "You are leaving" sign was a lie. Elena drove for another 30 minutes, her truck rolling at that same slow, inexorable pace. The town never ended. It kept generating around her, new streets branching off, new buildings appearing, all maintaining that same impossible perfection. At 11:52 p.m., Elena noticed her fuel gauge. Quarter tank. But she'd had 3/4 when she took the exit. She'd only driven maybe 40 kilometers through this endless town. Her truck should have barely touched the fuel supply. But the gauge continued dropping as she watched. Quarter tank, 1/8 tank, 16th tank. At this rate, she'd run out of fuel in minutes. "Please," Elena said to no one, to the empty town, to whatever force had trapped her here. "Please, I just want to go home. I just want to leave." The fuel gauge hit empty. The low fuel warning chime sounded, but the truck kept moving, kept rolling east through the impossible town, burning fuel that didn't exist. At exactly midnight, something changed. The buildings began to show wear. Cracks appeared in walls. Paint peeled. Windows broke. The perfect town started decaying, years of neglect appearing in seconds. The street lights flickered. Some went dark. Elena's fear transformed into terror. Whatever had maintained this place's facade was failing, and she was about to see what lay beneath. The businesses darkened. Their signs shut off one by one, leaving stretches of deep shadow between the remaining streetlights. In those shadows, Elena thought she saw movement. Shapes that might be people, might be something else, moving with wrong, stilted gaits. A figure appeared in the street ahead, humanoid, roughly person-sized but wrong in ways Elena's mind struggled to process. It stood in the center of the lane, directly in her truck's path. Elena tried to swerve. The wheel wouldn't turn. Her truck rolled forward straight toward the figure. At the last moment, the figure moved. Not walking, it relocated, appearing 5 meters to the left without any transition of movement. Elena's truck rolled past where it had been standing. In her side mirror, she saw the figure turn to watch her pass. It had no face, just smooth surface where features should be. More figures appeared. They stood in doorways, on sidewalks, in parking lots. Dozens of them, all featureless, all watching Elena's truck roll past with attention that felt hungry, calculating. Elena's breath came in short gasps. Panic clawed at her chest. She was going to die here, in this impossible town, surrounded by these things that weren't people. At 12:17 a.m., the road ahead showed something different. Red lights, taillights, another vehicle. Elena's hope surged, another truck, another driver, proof that she wasn't alone in this nightmare. She pressed on the horn. It worked, the sound blaring through the silent town. The vehicle ahead didn't respond, just maintained its slow roll eastward. As Elena's truck drew closer, she could see details. It was a semi-truck similar to her own, hauling what looked like a refrigerated trailer. The license plate was visible in her headlights. Elena's plate, her license number. She was following herself. The realization broke something in Elena's mind. This wasn't just a strange town, this was a trap, a loop. Something that fed on travelers who made the mistake of taking the wrong exit. And she'd been rolling through it for hours, maybe days, maybe forever, following her own truck in an endless circuit. The featureless figures watched from everywhere now. Hundreds of them lined the streets, silent witnesses to Elena's trapped journey. At 12:34 a.m., Elena's truck abruptly stopped. Not gradually, it simply ceased moving as if it had hit an invisible wall. The engine died, the lights went out, everything went dark. Elena sat in absolute blackness, hearing only her own ragged breathing. The silence was complete. No engine sounds, no wind, no ambient noise of any kind. Then light appeared, not from streetlights or buildings, but from above. Elena looked up through her windshield and saw stars. More stars than should be visible, impossibly bright, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. And she heard a voice, not through her CB radio or from outside. The voice came from inside her head, bypassing her ears entirely. Wrong exit, wrong choice, wrong road. But we appreciate the company. So few visitors, so few travelers. Stay with us. Stay forever. No, Elena whispered. Let me go, please. There is no going, only staying. Only becoming part of Meridian, part of the pattern, part of forever. The featureless figures had surrounded her truck. Elena could see them in the starlight, pressed against her windows, their smooth, non-faces inches from the glass. They raised their hands, if the appendages could be called hands, and placed them against the windows. The glass began to crack. Spiderweb patterns spread from where they touched, fractures propagating across the windshield, the side windows, every piece of glass on Elena's truck. Elena screamed. She closed her eyes, unable to watch any longer, unable to face what was about to happen. And then she felt movement. Not her truck moving, but reality moving around her. A sensation of immense speed and distance, of being pulled through space or time or dimensions that human minds weren't equipped to understand. When Elena opened her eyes, she was on Highway 16. Normal Highway 16 with normal darkness and normal prairie on either side. Her headlights showed the white line marking the road's edge. Her GPS displayed her position, 3 kilometers east of where the Meridian exit had been. Her fuel gauge read 3/4 full. Her clock showed 10:29 p.m. 2 minutes after she'd taken the exit, as if everything, the hours of driving, the impossible town, the featureless figures, had been compressed into 2 minutes of normal time. Elena pulled over to the shoulder. She sat there, engine running, lights on, while she checked herself. Her hands were shaking, her heart raced, but she was intact, alive, free. She grabbed her CB radio. It worked normally, carrying the usual trucker chatter. She tried her cell phone, full signal. Elena didn't stop in Lloydminster. She drove straight through, delivered her load, and kept driving west. She didn't stop until she reached Calgary, didn't feel safe until she was home, with her doors locked and her family around her. She filed a report claiming mechanical delays, and no one questioned it. But Elena never drove Highway 16 at night again. She rerouted, taking Highway 1 instead, adding time to her trips but avoiding that stretch of road where the wrong exit had appeared. And she never told anyone the full story. How could she explain that she'd spent hours in a town that didn't exist, that she'd been trapped in a loop, following her own truck, that things without faces had tried to make her part of their eternal pattern? But sometimes when Elena drives past exits on any highway, she feels a moment of hesitation, a whisper of doubt, because she knows now that not all roads lead to places on maps. Some exits lead to elsewhere, to places that exist in the cracks of reality, waiting for travelers who make the wrong choice. And somewhere in Alberta, maybe on Highway 16, maybe on some other road, an exit sign appears occasionally for drivers passing at just the right time. Meridian, 2 kilometers. Most drivers ignore it, but some, out of curiosity or confusion or fate, take that exit. And Meridian welcomes them, adds them to its population of the trapped, the lost, the ones who chose the wrong road and could never find their way back. Elena knows she was lucky. Lucky that something, whatever force governed that impossible place, chose to release her. But she never learned why. And the possibility that it might change its mind, might reach out through space or time or dimension to reclaim her, haunts every journey she takes. Story 8. The Thing in the Fuel. Aaron Mitchell had hauled fuel for Northern Petroleum Services for 13 years, specializing in deliveries to remote drilling sites and exploration camps across northern Alberta. In all those years, he'd never had a cargo that frightened him. Fuel was fuel, regulated and tested, nothing that should cause concern beyond standard safety protocols. But on December 2, 2020, Aaron picked up a specialized load from a refinery near Edmonton. 18,000 liters of diesel fuel bound for an experimental drilling operation in the Athabasca oil sands region. The paperwork described it as enhanced Arctic-grade diesel with experimental additives, and the loading supervisor emphasized that the cargo required constant temperature monitoring and absolutely could not be contaminated. Aaron should have asked more questions, but the pay was substantial, and he needed the money for his daughter's medical bills. So he loaded his tanker, checked his seals, and headed north. By 3 a.m. somewhere on Highway 63, Aaron realized that something was alive in his cargo. Something that moved, something that was aware. The loading process at the refinery had been unusual from the start. Instead of the standard pump operators, Aaron watched as technicians in full hazmat suits handled the fuel transfer. They worked with extreme caution, monitoring pressure, gauges, and temperature readings constantly. The loading supervisor, a woman named Dr. Martinez, had given Aaron explicit instructions. Maintain cargo temperature between 5 and 10 degrees Celsius, monitor for any pressure changes in the tank, and call a special emergency number immediately if any alarms sounded. "What's in this fuel?" Aaron had asked. "What are these additives?" Dr. Martinez had chosen her words carefully. "Proprietary compounds that improve performance at extreme temperatures. Nothing dangerous if protocols are followed. Just maintain the temperature and deliver it within 12 hours. Aaron's tanker was equipped with temperature control and extensive monitoring systems. This wasn't his first specialized load. He'd hauled everything from aviation fuel to industrial solvents. This should be routine. He departed the refinery at 6:30 p.m. The December darkness had already settled over Alberta, the sun having set hours earlier. Aaron's route would take him north on Highway 63, that notorious stretch known as the Highway of Death, to a remote drilling site about 30 kilometers west of Fort McMurray. Total drive time, approximately 7 hours, giving him plenty of margin within the 12-hour delivery window. The first 3 hours passed normally. Aaron maintained steady speed, monitored his cargo temperature, holding at exactly 7 degrees Celsius, and listened to podcasts to pass the time. His tanker was a newer model Peterbilt with excellent handling and a comfortable cab. Easy driving. At 9:47 p.m., Aaron was about halfway to his destination when the first alarm sounded. The cargo temperature had spiked to 12 degrees Celsius. Aaron immediately checked his cooling system. All gauges showed normal operation, but the temperature continued climbing. 13 degrees, 14 degrees, 15 degrees. He pulled over to the shoulder and activated the auxiliary cooling system. The temperature should drop quickly. The outside air was minus 38 Celsius, plenty of cold to draw heat from the cargo. But the temperature kept climbing. Aaron grabbed the emergency number Dr. Martinez had given him. His cell phone showed marginal signal. 1 bar, barely enough. The call connected, but before Aaron could speak, he heard something else. A sound from the tanker behind him. A deep resonant humming, like an enormous tuning fork vibrating at a frequency just at the edge of hearing. "This is Aaron Mitchell, Unit 7 for Northern Petroleum," he said quickly into the phone. Temperature alarm on specialized cargo, temperature increasing despite cooling systems. Dr. Martinez's voice came through with heavy static. "What's current reading? 19 degrees and climbing. What do I do?" The connection broke up. "Critical. Do not. Contamination. Keep moving." "Say again, you're breaking up." "Moving. Motion helps. Stabilize. Do not stop." The call dropped. Aaron tried to redial, but now he had no signal at all. The humming from the tanker intensified. Aaron could feel it through the truck's frame now, a vibration that made his teeth ache. The temperature reading showed 23 degrees. He followed the last instruction he'd understood. Keep moving. Aaron pulled back onto Highway 63 and accelerated. As his speed increased, the temperature stopped climbing. At 100 kilometers per hour, it began to drop. 23, 22, 21. The humming didn't stop. If anything, it grew more complex, developing harmonics and variations that almost sounded purposeful, almost sounded like communication. At 10:34 p.m., Aaron noticed movement in his cargo tank. The gauge showed fluid motion inside, not sloshing from the truck's movement, but active circulation, as if something was stirring the fuel, moving through it with intent. That was impossible. Fuel didn't move on its own. Even with temperature variations, any movement should be passive, driven by convection. This looked like something swimming. Aaron's hands tightened on the wheel. He told himself he was seeing instrument glitches, sensor errors. But the movement patterns continued, showing circular flows, spirals, shapes that couldn't be random. At 11:02 p.m., the humming changed. It developed rhythm, patterns that repeated with variations. And Aaron realized with mounting horror that it sounded like language, not human language. The frequency was too low, the structure too alien. But it had grammar, syntax, the suggestion of meaning. Aaron tried his cell phone again. Still no signal. His CB radio produced only static when he tried to transmit. He was alone on this highway with 18,000 liters of fuel that contained something alive. The temperature had stabilized at 15 degrees as long as Aaron maintained speed. But his fuel gauge was dropping faster than normal. He was burning diesel at an accelerated rate, and at this pace, he wouldn't have enough to reach the delivery site. He'd need to stop for fuel. There was a truck stop ahead at Mariana Lakes about 30 minutes away. Aaron decided he'd risk a stop, refuel quickly, and continue. The thing in his cargo, whatever it was, seemed to tolerate brief stops based on his earlier experience. At 11:38 p.m., Aaron pulled into the truck stop. The place was nearly empty at this hour. Just one other vehicle, a pickup truck at the gas pumps. Aaron backed his tanker into the diesel lane and shut off his engine. The humming stopped immediately. So did all movement in the cargo tank. Aaron's monitoring system showed the fuel completely still, temperature holding steady at 15 degrees. Aaron climbed down from his cab, his legs unsteady after 5 hours of driving under stress. He started the refueling process, watching the diesel flow into his truck's tanks while compulsively checking his tanker for any visible problems. Everything looked normal. The tanker showed no damage, no leaks, no external signs of the impossibility occurring within. Aaron was replacing the fuel nozzle when he heard a sound from his cargo tank. Not humming this time, scratching, like something dragging against the interior surface of the tank, like fingernails on metal, amplified and distorted. He backed away from the tanker. The scratching intensified, coming from multiple points now, as if several things were moving inside, all trying to reach the outer surface. A man approached from the truck stop building, the attendant wearing a concerned expression. "You okay? Your tank is making weird noises." "Stay back," Aaron warned. But even as he spoke, something began to happen to the tanker's surface. The metal started to discolor, patches of corrosion appearing and spreading like rust on fast forward. The scratching sounds grew louder. The attendant pulled out his phone. "I'm calling." The corrosion spots bubbled, and through one of them something pushed. Not breaking through, but pressing against the thinned metal, creating a visible bulge. Aaron could see the outline of what might be a hand. If hands had too many fingers, if fingers bent in too many directions. "Get inside," Aaron shouted to the attendant. "Get away from it." They ran to the truck stop building. Through the window, Aaron watched his tanker with horrified fascination. More corrosion spots appeared, more bulges pressed against the weakened surface. Whatever was inside wanted out. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The metal stopped corroding. The bulges withdrew. The scratching ceased. Aaron's monitoring system, visible through his truck's open door, showed the cargo temperature dropping. 15 degrees, 10 degrees, 7 degrees, 5 degrees. Going dormant. Whatever those things were, they were settling back into dormancy. Aaron called the emergency number again. This time it connected clearly. "Martinez," the voice answered. "This is Mitchell. The cargo is trying to breach the tank. There's something alive in it. What the hell am I carrying?" A long pause. Then, "Mr. Mitchell, listen carefully. The additives in the fuel are experimental microorganisms designed to break down hydrocarbons more efficiently in Arctic conditions. They're supposed to be dormant in fuel form. Something has activated them prematurely. Microorganisms don't scratch metal. Microorganisms don't make sounds." Another pause. "These aren't normal microorganisms. They're synthetic, engineered, and they appear to have developed beyond their designed parameters. Can you reach the delivery site? You want me to keep driving with these things? The delivery site is equipped to contain them properly. If you try to offload anywhere else, they could contaminate the environment. You must reach the drilling site. And if they breach the tank before I get there?" "They won't. The corrosion you observed is a stress response. As long as they stay cold and you keep moving, they'll remain contained. Please, Mr. Mitchell, we're talking about potential environmental catastrophe if these organisms escape." Aaron wanted to refuse, wanted to walk away from this nightmare. But Dr. Martinez was right about the environmental danger. And if these things got loose in northern Alberta... "I'm finishing refueling," Aaron said. "Then I'm driving straight to the site. You better have people ready to contain this cargo the moment I arrive." "We will, thank you." Aaron ended the call and returned to his truck. He completed his refueling with trembling hands, climbed back into his cab, and started the engine. The moment he pulled back onto Highway 63, the humming resumed. But this time, Aaron listened more carefully. The sound had structure, and beneath the alien frequency, he thought he could detect something else. Curiosity, maybe. Intelligence. These weren't mindless organisms. They were aware. They knew they were being transported. They knew a human was carrying them. At 12:47 a.m., Aaron's headlights illuminated something on the road ahead. A shape, human-sized, standing in the center of his lane. Aaron swerved, his heart hammering. But there was nothing there. The road was empty. The humming from his cargo changed tone, became something that might have been amusement if the sound were human. Were they projecting that image, creating hallucinations? More shapes appeared over the next hour. People standing on the road, animals that couldn't exist, structures that flickered in and out of visibility. Each time, Aaron's rational mind knew they weren't real. But his reflexes reacted anyway, swerving, braking, his stress levels climbing. The organisms were playing with him, testing him, or possibly trying to communicate in the only way they understood, through simulation, through projection, through manipulation of perception. At 2:15 a.m., Aaron's GPS showed he was 30 kilometers from the drilling site. 30 more minutes of this nightmare. The cargo temperature had climbed to 18 degrees despite his cooling system running at maximum. The organisms were generating their own heat now, their metabolic processes accelerating. Aaron could see the movement in his cargo tank intensifying, patterns that looked like schools of fish, like flocks of birds, coordinated and purposeful. They were organizing, becoming more sophisticated with each passing minute. At 2:37 a.m., Aaron turned onto the access road leading to the drilling site. Security lights blazed ahead. The facility was on high alert, waiting for him. He could see figures in hazmat suits, containment equipment, what looked like military vehicles. This was bigger than a simple experimental fuel shipment. This was a disaster being barely contained. Aaron pulled into the designated area. The moment he stopped, personnel swarmed his truck. They disconnected his tractor and moved his tanker into a specialized containment bay using a remote-controlled mover. Dr. Martinez approached his cab, now wearing a full hazmat suit. Her voice came through a speaker. "Mr. Mitchell, you did extremely well. The organisms will be contained and studied under proper protocols." "What if they escape?" Aaron asked. "What if they get into the groundwater, the soil?" "They can't survive long outside petroleum products. They'll die if exposed to normal environment. They're not a long-term threat." Aaron wanted to believe her. But he'd heard that humming, seen that coordinated movement, felt that intelligence pressing against the boundaries of its containment. These things were learning, adapting, evolving far faster than their creators had anticipated. "They're not going to stay contained," Aaron said quietly. "Whatever you designed them to be, they've become something else." Dr. Martinez didn't respond, but Aaron saw the worry in her eyes through the hazmat suit's faceplate. Aaron was escorted to a decontamination station, checked thoroughly for any exposure to the experimental fuel, and cleared for release. They paid him triple the original rate. Hazard compensation, they called it. And they made him sign extensive non-disclosure agreements. He drove back to Edmonton empty, his tanker scrubbed clean by decontamination crews. But for days afterward, Aaron felt like he could still hear that humming, still feel that vibration through the truck's frame. And when he closed his eyes, he saw the movement patterns in the cargo tank. Shapes organizing, intelligence emerging, life finding a way to express itself even in the most hostile environment. Aaron quit Northern Petroleum Services 2 weeks later. He took a local delivery job, hauling groceries and dry goods, nothing experimental, nothing that could contain surprises. He never mentioned the real reason for leaving. The NDAs forbade it. But 6 months later, Aaron saw a news story about unexplained contamination in the Athabasca oil sands region, fuel samples showing unusual bacterial content, equipment failures at drilling sites, and deep in the article, buried in technical language, a mention of experimental cleanup programs being suspended due to unforeseen complications. Aaron knew. The organisms had escaped. They'd found a way, just as he'd predicted. And now they were out there, reproducing in the vast petroleum reserves of northern Alberta. Evolving, spreading, becoming something their creators had never intended. He never told anyone what he knew. What good would it do? The organisms were free now, adapting to their environment, possibly altering the fundamental chemistry of Alberta's oil reserves. By the time anyone realized the full scope of what had been unleashed, it would be far too late to contain them. And sometimes, late at night, Aaron imagined those organisms down in the deep petroleum deposits, humming in their alien frequency, communicating with each other across vast underground reservoirs, organizing into something larger, something that human science had accidentally birthed and could never control. He'd been the midwife to something new in the world, something that lived in fuel, that moved with purpose, that possessed intelligence no one had intended to create, and that knowledge followed Aaron Mitchell for the rest of his life. A secret burden he could never share, never escape. Story 9. The Static Passenger. Connor MacDonald had been an owner-operator for 19 years, hauling general freight across Western Canada with his trusted freightliner that he'd bought new and maintained meticulously. He preferred working alone, no company dispatcher breathing down his neck, no artificial deadlines, just him and the road. On October 31, 2018, Connor accepted a load through a freight broker. Construction materials from Red Deer to a building site near Peace River, a straightforward 6-hour run. Halloween night driving didn't bother Connor. He'd driven through every condition, every season, every holiday. But somewhere north of Westlock, on a lonely stretch of Highway 2 at 1:45 a.m., Connor picked up a hitchhiker. Not intentionally, not by choice. The hitchhiker simply appeared in his passenger seat while Connor was driving 70 kilometers per hour, and what followed was a conversation that challenged Connor's understanding of life, death, and the spaces between. The evening started with that particular quality of Halloween night in rural Alberta. Cold, clear, with a thin crescent moon providing minimal light. Connor had loaded his trailer with lumber, drywall, and roofing materials in Red Deer just before sundown. The load was secure, the route was familiar, and Connor expected to reach Peace River by 3 a.m., offload in the morning, and grab a hotel room for some rest. He made good time through the early evening, passing through Innisfail, Bowden, and Olds. By 11:01 p.m., he was approaching Edmonton's northern outskirts. The traffic thinned as he continued north past the city, and by midnight he was on the open highway with only occasional vehicles passing in the opposite direction. Connor's CB radio picked up scattered Halloween chatter, truckers joking about the date, sharing stories about strange encounters on the road, the usual friendly banter that helped pass the lonely hours. Connor participated occasionally but mostly listened, enjoying the company without the obligation. At 1:33 a.m., Connor was about 20 kilometers north of Westlock when his radio began acting strangely. The conversations he'd been following cut out, replaced by static. Not the usual white noise static, but something more structured. Patterns in the interference, like a signal buried beneath the noise. Connor adjusted his squelch, trying to clear the reception. The patterns continued, and then distinctly he heard what sounded like breathing. Deep, slow, rhythmic breathing transmitted through his CB radio's speaker. "CB check," Connor said, using the standard phrase to test if anyone was transmitting. "This is northbound Freightliner on Highway 2. Anyone on this channel?" The breathing stopped. A voice responded, male, quiet. Yes, I'm here. You transmitting okay? Connor asked. You were breaking up. Was I? The voice sounded puzzled. I wasn't aware I was transmitting. Well, someone's broadcasting breathing on channel 19. If it's not you, somebody's got an open mic. Ah, that might be me, I apologize. I'm not entirely familiar with how this technology works anymore. Connor frowned at the odd phrasing. Where are you located? You need a tow or assistance? Located? The voice paused. I'm not entirely certain. Roads all look the same after a while. What mile marker are you near? I don't see any markers, just darkness and highway. I've been driving for quite some time. Something about the conversation felt off. Connor checked his mirrors. Empty highway behind him, no headlights visible. What kind of vehicle are you driving? A truck. Old one. International, I think. It's been so long I barely remember. You been driving all night? Yes. And all the nights before, many nights, I've lost count. The hair on the back of Connor's neck prickled. You feeling okay, driver? You sound tired. Tired. Yes, very tired. I'd like to stop, but I can't seem to find an exit. Connor was about to respond when he noticed something in his peripheral vision. Movement in his passenger seat. He turned his head. A man sat there, middle-aged, wearing clothes from decades past. A denim jacket, a flannel shirt, work boots. He looked solid, real. But Connor had been alone in his cab 30 seconds ago. The passenger door hadn't opened. No one could have entered while Connor was driving. Connor jerked the wheel instinctively, the truck swerving before he corrected. What the? How did you? The man in the passenger seat looked at him with tired eyes. I apologize for startling you. I didn't mean to. It's difficult to manifest gradually. I'm either there or not there. Connor's heart hammered. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. Who are you? How did you get in my truck? My name is Robert Callahan. I was a trucker like you. Long haul, mostly. Drove for 32 years. Robert spoke calmly, as if his impossible appearance was the most natural thing in the world. That doesn't answer how you got in here. No, it doesn't. The truth is complicated. Robert looked out the windshield at the highway ahead. I died on this road, December 18th, 1991. Ice storm, lost control. The truck rolled. I didn't survive. Connor wanted to slam on the brakes, wanted to throw open his door and run, but some deep instinct told him to keep driving, to act normally, as if having a ghost in your passenger seat was an everyday occurrence. You're saying you're dead, Connor said, keeping his voice steady through sheer force of will. Yes. Though dead is a complicated term, I exist, I'm aware, I'm communicating with you, so in some sense I'm not dead. But my physical body stopped functioning 27 years ago. Connor glanced at his passenger again. Robert looked entirely solid, entirely real. If Connor hadn't witnessed him appear from nothing, he'd never guessed the man was anything other than a hitchhiker who'd been sitting there the whole time. Why are you here? Connor asked. Because I'm trapped. I died while driving, and some part of me didn't stop. I've been driving these Alberta highways for nearly 3 decades. I appear in trucks sometimes, trying to figure out how to stop, how to rest, how to finish the journey that ended so abruptly. Have you talked to other drivers? A few. Most can't see me. I can't always manifest visibly. Some hear me on their CB radios but think I'm another driver somewhere on the highway. You're one of the few I've been able to appear to directly. Connor's mind raced, trying to process this. His rational side insisted this was a hallucination, fatigue, highway hypnosis, something explainable. But Robert sat there in perfect clarity, his presence undeniable. What do you want from me? Connor asked. Conversation, mostly. It's lonely being trapped like this. I can't interact with the world in meaningful ways. I can't touch things, can't affect physical objects. But sometimes I can manifest to drivers, and for a little while I feel almost human again. Connor drove in silence for a moment, watching the highway ahead. This is real. You're actually here. I'm as real as anything gets in my current state, Robert confirmed. I know it's disturbing. I'm sorry. If I could stop this, stop appearing to drivers and frightening them, I would. But I have no control over it. Can you leave? Right now? Eventually, yes. I typically stay visible for anywhere from a few minutes to an hour. Then I fade. I don't control the timing. Connor took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. If Robert was stuck here, if this was really happening, maybe conversation would help both of them. What's it like, being the way you are? Robert considered the question. Lonely, confusing. I experience time strangely. Sometimes it feels like minutes have passed and it's actually been years. Sometimes I'm aware of my surroundings and sometimes I'm just drifting. I remember my wife, my children, my life before, but those memories feel increasingly distant, like they belong to someone else. Have you seen your family since you died? No. I can't leave the highways. I've tried. I can manifest in trucks traveling Alberta's roads, but I can't go to homes or towns. It's like I'm bound to the asphalt, to the white lines and mile markers. This is my territory now. Connor glanced at Robert again. The ghost looked sad, exhausted, carrying a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. Why tonight? Connor asked. Why Halloween? The barriers are thinner tonight, between states of being, between what is and what was. I can manifest more easily, maintain form longer. So I try to find drivers who might be willing to talk, who might not panic and crash when I appear. Considerate of you, Connor said, and was surprised to find he meant it. Despite the initial terror, Robert seemed genuinely harmless. Just a lonely spirit trying to connect with something familiar. They drove in silence for several minutes. Connor found his fear gradually replaced by curiosity. Do you remember the crash? Connor asked. The moment you died? Pieces. I remember the ice, the truck sliding. I remember trying to correct, overcorrecting, then rolling, then nothing. Or not nothing. Something else. When I became aware again, I was standing on the shoulder of Highway 2, watching emergency vehicles around my crashed truck. I tried to approach, tried to tell them I was okay, but they couldn't see me. And then I understood. That must have been terrifying. It was. Still is sometimes. This existence, if you can call it that, is like being stuck between channels on a radio. I pick up fragments of the living world, but I can't fully engage with it. I'm just static. Connor thought about that. The static on my CB before you appeared, was that you trying to communicate? Yes. It's easier to affect electronic devices than physical objects. Radios, sometimes lights. I've learned to use those things to signal my presence, though most drivers just think their equipment is malfunctioning. Have you seen other ghosts? Other drivers who died and got stuck? A few. We can perceive each other, though we can't interact much more than we can interact with the living world. There's a woman who died on Highway 16 somewhere near Hinton. I've sensed her presence. And a younger man on Highway 63. He crashed only a few years ago. We're scattered across the province, trapped in our final routes. Connor felt a deep sadness for these lost souls, endlessly driving roads they'd traveled in life, unable to reach their destinations, unable to rest. Is there anything that could free you? Connor asked. Some way to help you move on? Robert smiled sadly. I don't know. I've tried everything I can think of, retracing my final route, avoiding the location where I crashed, trying to reach my old home. Nothing works. I'm bound. here by something I don't understand. What about your truck? The one you crashed in, is it still around? It was scrapped years ago. I watched them haul it away to a junkyard. I thought maybe destroying the physical truck would free me, but it didn't change anything. Connor glanced at his fuel gauge. He'd need to stop for diesel soon. There was a truck stop ahead at Valley View, maybe 40 minutes away. Would Robert stay visible that long? Would he fade when Connor stopped? As if reading his thoughts, Robert said, "I'll probably disappear before you stop. I rarely maintain form for more than an hour." "But Connor, may I call you Connor?" "Yes." "Connor, thank you for not panicking, for listening. Most drivers who see me either can't accept I'm real and convince themselves they imagined me, or they're so frightened they won't engage. You've given me the first real conversation I've had in... I honestly don't remember how long." "What do you miss most?" Connor asked. "About being alive?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. "Touch, physical sensation, the feeling of holding my wife's hand, of hugging my children, the taste of coffee, the smell of diesel and road dust. I can see those things, remember them, but I can't experience them anymore. I'm a ghost in every sense, present but not fully real." "Do you feel this truck? The movement, the vibration?" "Vaguely, like sensing something through thick cotton. I know we're moving, but I don't feel it the way you do." Connor drove on, watching the kilometer markers pass. The landscape outside remained dark, empty fields stretching away on both sides of the highway. Robert sat quietly, looking out the window as if seeing scenery he'd observed 1,000 times but never tired of. At 2:23 a.m., Robert began to fade. Not dramatically, just gradually becoming more transparent, his edges blurring. "I'm losing cohesion," Robert said. "Thank you again, Connor, for your time, your kindness." "Will I see you again?" Connor asked. "Possibly. I manifest randomly. But if you drive Alberta highways regularly, we might cross paths." Robert's voice was fading now, becoming distant. "Drive safely. Remember that every mile marker, every stretch of road has stories. Some of them end. Some of them continue long after they should have stopped." Robert vanished completely. One moment present, the next gone, as if he'd never been there. The passenger seat was empty, showing no sign anyone had occupied it. Connor drove in silence for several minutes, processing the encounter. His CB radio crackled and he heard normal conversation. Truckers discussing weather, road conditions, the usual topics. The static was gone. Connor picked up his CB. "This is northbound Freightliner passing mile marker 473. Quick question for anyone listening. Any of you ever encounter something strange on the road? Something you couldn't explain?" A voice responded immediately. "Oh yeah, been driving 23 years, seen all kinds of weird shit." "Why?" "Something happened." "Just had an unusual conversation," Connor said carefully, "with someone who wasn't physically there." Another voice joined in. "Halloween night, man, the weird ones always come out on Halloween. I once saw a whole convoy of old trucks, I'm talking 1950s vintage, pass me on Highway 1, looked solid and real. But when I tried to follow them, they just vanished." A third voice. "My dad drove for 40 years before he retired. He swore he talked to ghosts on the CB regular. Said the highways are full of drivers who never stopped driving even after they died. Doesn't surprise me one bit." Connor found comfort in these responses. He wasn't crazy. Whatever he'd experienced, others had experienced similar phenomena. The highways held more than living travelers. He reached Peace River at 3:17 a.m., an hour later than planned. The conversation with Robert had distracted him, slowed his pace. But Connor didn't mind. He'd had the most remarkable encounter of his 19-year career. A conversation with someone beyond death, someone trapped in an existence Connor couldn't fully comprehend. Connor completed his delivery and checked into a hotel. But before sleep, he did some research on his laptop. He found the obituary easily. Robert Callahan, 54, died December 18, 1991, in a single-vehicle accident on Highway 2. Survived by wife Margaret, children Sarah and Thomas. Celebrated long-haul trucker with 32 years of safe driving before the fatal crash. Everything Robert had told him was true. Connor continued driving professionally for another 6 years. He never saw Robert again, though he sometimes heard that distinctive static on his CB radio, always late at night, always on deserted stretches of highway. He'd respond when it happened. "I hear you, Robert. You're not alone." The static would clear, and Connor liked to think that somewhere in that space between being and not being, Robert appreciated knowing someone remembered him, someone listened for his signal. When Connor retired from trucking, he made a point to drive Highway 2 one last time, in the dead of night, just him and the road. He transmitted on his CB, "This is Connor McDonald signing off after 25 years. Robert, if you're out there, I hope you find your way home eventually. Thanks for the conversation. It meant more than you know." For just a moment, his CB radio filled with static, and through the interference, Connor heard a voice. "Thank you, Connor. Safe travels. Wherever you're going, I hope you arrive." Then silence. Normal silence, without the weight of presence, without the sense of someone listening from beyond. Connor turned off his CB radio and drove on, leaving the highway behind, moving toward retirement and rest. But he never forgot Robert Callahan, the ghost in his passenger seat, the driver who couldn't stop driving even after death. And sometimes Connor wondered if all those who spent their lives on the road left something behind, a trace, an echo, a small piece of themselves embedded in the asphalt and white lines and endless miles. The highways remember. And sometimes, on certain nights when conditions are right, they share those memories with travelers willing to listen.